There is a night that changes everything, and this is one of those nights. A 10-year-old girl walked alone through freezing rain into the most dangerous room in Portland. She wasn't crying. She was holding a loaded revolver with both hands, and she wasn't pointing it at anyone. She was just holding it the way a child holds the only thing left in the world that makes her feel safe. 15 outlaws went dead silent, and in that silence, she said 7 words that broke every hard man in the room. "One of you is my father." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And the man who had survived 2 wars, 3 federal investigations, and more funerals than he could count, Jack Morrison, president of the Devil's Run MC, felt something crack open in his chest that hadn't moved in 9 years. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when a broken world gets one chance to do something right, stay with us. This story goes all the way to the end, and it will cost you something to get there. Hit that like button, drop your city in the comments right now. Whether you're watching from Houston, Chicago, Seattle, Miami, or somewhere out in the middle of nowhere at 2 in the morning, we see you. Let's ride. The rain had been falling since Tuesday. By Thursday night, it had turned into something meaner. Not the kind of rain that washes things clean, but the kind that exposes everything wrong underneath, that finds the cracks in the roof and the rot in the walls, and the grief people tuck into their coat pockets and carry around like stones. The highway outside Portland ran black and slick under the sodium lights, and the diner on the edge of Route 9 had been half dead for years. Its neon sign missing 2 letters, so it just blinked Aries into the dark. Like a distress signal, nobody answered. The Devil's Run clubhouse sat behind the diner, connected by a gravel lot that turned to mud in the rain. It wasn't much to look at from the outside. A converted auto shop with reinforced doors and blacked-out windows, and a Devil's Run patch mounted above the entrance like a warning. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke, and the specific smell of men who had spent too long around engines and leather and cheap whiskey, men who had stopped pretending they belonged anywhere that had tablecloths or ambient lighting or expectations. A wood stove in the corner pushed heat into the room, but couldn't reach the cold that lived in the walls. There were 15 of them that night, not a full house. Some were out on a run down to Eugene, 2 more were dealing with a supplier situation near the coast, but 15 was enough. Enough boots on the floor, enough scarred hands wrapped around bottles, enough silence of the specific kind that happens when men who've seen too much gather in a room and agree, without saying anything, not to talk about any of it. Jack Morrison sat at the head of the long table with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. He was 44 years old and looked older, not in a fallen way, but in the way of something that had been tested repeatedly and simply refused to break. 2 tours in Fallujah, 1 in Kandahar, a shrapnel scar that ran from his left cheekbone to his jaw like a river on a map of somewhere no one wanted to visit. His hands were the hands of a mechanic, permanently stained with grease under the nails, knuckles that had been broken and reset and broken again. And he rested them flat on the table now, very still, the way he went still when something was wrong and he hadn't yet identified what. He didn't know what was wrong. He just knew something was. Reaper, Marcus Webb to the DMV, nobody else, was running his mouth about a poker debt someone owed him, and 3 of the younger guys were listening with the performative interest of men who didn't care but needed somewhere to put their eyes. Cole Martinez sat at the far end of the table doing nothing at all, which was how Cole usually sat. He was 36, lean and dark-eyed, with hands that had done violent things and a face that had long since stopped apologizing for it. He had a glass of whiskey in front of him that he'd been nursing for an hour. He wasn't drinking it. He was just keeping it company. Tiny, 6'4", 260 pounds, the name a joke nobody had explained to him and nobody needed to, was at the bar running a rag over glasses that were already clean, which was what Tiny did when he was thinking about something he didn't want to think about. The door opened. Not knocked, not buzzed through the intercom, just opened, like whoever was on the other side hadn't considered that it might be locked, or that walking into a room full of outlaw bikers uninvited was the kind of thing that tended to end badly. The cold came in first, then the rain smell, then the girl. She was small, smaller than 10 years old usually looks. Or maybe it was just the way she was standing, shoulders pulled in, hair plastered flat to her face by the rain. Her jacket was a child's jacket, thin canvas, The kind of thing that would have been adequate in September and was completely inadequate now in November. Her jeans were soaked through. Her sneakers left wet prints on the concrete floor. She had walked a long way in that rain, and her body knew it, her posture carrying the specific exhaustion of someone who had been moving because stopping wasn't an option. In her hands, held out slightly in front of her at hip height, was a revolver. A .38 Special. Older model, blued steel. The kind of gun that had been in someone's drawer for 2 decades before this child picked it up. Her grip was wrong. Both hands around the grip, thumbs stacked, the barrel pointed slightly down. But she wasn't pointing it at anyone. She was just holding it, like it was the only thing she owned that the night couldn't take from her. 15 men went quiet. Not the gradual quiet of a room settling down. The immediate total quiet of 15 people suddenly and completely still. The kind of silence that has weight. Jack was on his feet before he knew he'd moved. He didn't go for the weapon at his hip. He didn't signal anyone. He just stood up slowly, the way you stand up when startling something would make everything worse, and he put both hands visible at his sides, and he looked at the girl, and he waited. She looked back at him. Her eyes were dark and very serious and completely without tears, which was somehow more devastating than crying would have been. She had the look of a child who had already spent her tears on something earlier in the day and had nothing left for this moment, which meant whatever had happened before she walked in here had been worse than walking into a room full of armed men. She said, "One of you is my father." The words landed in the silence like stones dropped into still water, the ripples going out and touching every man in that room. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The wood stove ticked. Rain hammered the roof. Jack said very quietly, "Okay." Just that. Okay. Not as agreement, not as confirmation, just as an acknowledgement that she had spoken, that he had heard her, that the world was not going to collapse in the next 10 seconds. "Put the gun down on the table for me. Right there. Don't point it at anything." She looked at him for a long moment, deciding. Then she walked to the nearest table, 3 feet, 4 feet, not breaking eye contact with him, and set the gun down. The sound of it on the wood was very loud in the quiet. "What's your name?" Jack said. "Ava." She paused. "Ava Bennett." Something moved through Jack's face, a twitch, a shift, the kind of micro-expression a man produces when a name hits a memory he'd sealed off and locked down and tried very hard not to visit. He controlled it in about half a second, but Cole, who had been watching Jack's face for 12 years, saw it and went very still at his end of the table. "Where did you come from, Ava?" Jack said. "St. Vincent's Hospital." Her voice was flat, not emotionless, but controlled in the way of a child who has been told to stay calm by every adult around her and has learned that staying calm means you get more information than falling apart does. "My mom is there. They said maybe she'll wake up and maybe she won't." A pause. "She was in a car accident, except it wasn't an accident." The rain on the roof. Jack pulled out a chair, not toward himself. He set it in front of her, turned it around, set it there as an offering without making her take it. "Sit down," he said. "You're cold, tiny. Get her something hot. Coffee with a lot of sugar, or hot chocolate if we have it." "We have it," Tiny said, and he was already moving. Ava did not sit. She stood and looked around the room at all of them, and there was something almost clinical about the way she was assessing them, like she was doing a kind of math, measuring each face against something her mother had told her, or something she'd seen in a photograph, or some internal calculus of this person. Could it be this person? Does something in me recognize this face? "My mom told me," she said carefully, "that my father was in a motorcycle club outside Portland. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should find them." Another pause. "She said they would help." "Who's your mother?" Jack said, though something in his voice had already shifted, already knew. "Sarah." Ava looked at him. "Sarah Bennett." The silence that followed that name was different from the first silence. The first had been the silence of men confronted with something unexpected. This was the silence of men confronted with something that mattered, something that reached back years and grabbed them by the collar and would not let go. Jack sat down. Not a collapse. A deliberate lowering of himself into a chair, The way a man sits when he needs a moment to reorganize everything he thought was settled. He pressed both fists against the table, knuckles down, and looked at them. Sarah Bennett had been 19 years old the last time anyone in this room had seen her. She had come into their world the way some people did, through a brother, a cousin, someone on the periphery. And she had stayed for almost a year, and she had been one of those people who make a place feel different just by being in it. Not loud, not demanding, just present in a way that made things better. She'd worked at the diner next door, morning shift, and half the club had eaten breakfast there every day for reasons that had nothing to do with the food. Then one morning she wasn't at the diner, and she wasn't anywhere else either. She had packed whatever she could carry and left without a word to anyone, and none of them had known why. And most of them had eventually stopped wondering, and the ones who hadn't, the ones for whom her leaving had meant something specific and personal and painful, had buried it under years and miles and the accumulated weight of everything else. Jack said, without looking up, "How long has she been at St. Vincent's? Since Monday," Ava said. 3 days. And Child Protective Services. The girl's expression shifted, the first crack in her control, something cold and frightened moving behind her eyes like an animal sensing weather. "They said they're coming Friday, tomorrow." She said it the way you say a thing you've been holding in your mouth like a stone, afraid to speak it because speaking it makes it real. "They said if my mom doesn't wake up and there's no family, they take me." Jack finally looked up. He looked at Ava, really looked at her, the way he hadn't quite let himself do yet. And in the diner fluorescence and the wood stove glow, he saw what he had been careful not to let himself see from the moment she walked in the door. She had Sarah's eyes. The exact shade, the exact shape, the way they went steady and serious when she was frightened rather than wide the way most people's did. She had Sarah's way of holding her chin slightly forward, a bracing gesture, weight forward on the balls of her feet even standing still. She did not look like Jack. He made himself check, made himself do the cold, rapid calculation that any man would do in this situation. And no, she did not have his jaw, or his coloring, or any of the architecture that ran in his blood. But that didn't tell him anything about the rest of them. He glanced toward Cole. Cole was staring at Ava with an expression Jack had never seen on his face before. Cole Martinez was not a man who showed things on his face. 12 years, countless situations that would have broken most men. And Cole had maintained a specific quality of stillness that made him unreadable even to people who knew him well. But right now, something was happening behind his eyes that he wasn't quite controlling. A storm going on inside a man who had spent years learning to be a weather system that happened only in private. Cole looked up and caught Jack looking at him. Neither of them spoke. The room waited. Tiny appeared at Ava's elbow with a mug of hot chocolate. Real hot chocolate. The kind from a packet, but made with care, with extra powder and real milk from the mini fridge, steam rising from it, and set it on the table beside her with the deliberate gentleness of a very large man who had spent years learning how not to frighten people. "Drink that," he said. "It'll help." She looked at him, looked at the mug. Something in her face said she wanted it desperately, and was deciding whether wanting it was safe. Then she picked it up and wrapped both hands around it and didn't drink it, just held the warmth. Jack leaned forward. "What do you know about the accident?" "It wasn't an accident." Her voice was flat with certainty. "My mom was scared. For weeks before. She kept checking the locks. She started parking different places, coming home different ways. She told me if a man with a badge ever came to the door, don't open it. Come find her." A pause. She wouldn't tell me what was wrong. She just kept saying she found something she shouldn't have found, and now she was figuring out what to do about it. "Found what?" "I don't know." "Who's the man with the badge?" Ava's jaw tightened. "His name is Dalton. Detective Dalton. He came to the hospital, said he was there to check on us." The way she said it, the flatness of it, the absolute absence of any warmth, communicated everything. "My mom's nurse said he'd been there every day, asking questions." Reaper muttered something under his breath at the other end of the table. Jack shot him a look and he went quiet. Jack said, "Did Detective Dalton see you at the hospital?" "No?" Something shifted in Ava's expression. And for a moment she looked not like a frightened child, but like someone who had thought something through very carefully and executed it precisely. I left before he got there. I found my mom's. She had an envelope in her coat. She'd written stuff down. She looked at Jack directly. She wrote your name, Jack Morrison, Devil's Run MC. A pause. And she wrote a list of other names. What other names? Ava set down the hot chocolate and reached into the inside pocket of her thin canvas jacket. A gesture so deliberate it was clear she'd been protecting this through the rain, through however many miles of walking, keeping it dry against her body. She produced an envelope, water-stained but intact, sealed. She put it on the table between herself and Jack. He didn't touch it yet. You read it, he said. Yes. What's on the list? She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, club members, 5 names, with a question mark next to each one. A beat. And one name at the bottom with no question mark, with the word. She stopped, breathed, started again, with the word run underlined 3 times. The room was very quiet. Jack picked up the envelope. Inside, in Sarah Bennett's handwriting, he recognized it from a decade ago, from notes slipped under the diner door, from a world that felt very far away now, was a single folded sheet of paper. 5 names in a column, each with a question mark. Cole Martinez was the 3rd on the list. At the bottom, underlined 3 times, was a name that made Jack's jaw tighten. Detective Mark Dalton. Not as a question, as an answer. Jack folded the paper, put it in his jacket pocket, and looked around the room at every man there. Nobody spoke. The fire ticked and the rain came down, and somewhere outside on the highway a truck passed, and its headlights swept the windows and were gone. Cole stood up. He walked the length of the table slowly, stood across from Ava. He was a large man, not in Tiny's massive way, but in a lean, coiled way, the kind of large that suggested capacity rather than bulk. His face, usually unreadable, was not entirely readable now either, but something in it had been unlocked. Some door that had been shut a long time, standing slightly open. He looked at her face. Just looked at it. The way he was doing the math Jack had done, but differently. Looking for different things. Things that were nothing about jaw angles or bone structure, but about something less measurable and more devastating. Ava looked back at him. After a long moment, she said, "You're Cole." It wasn't a question. "Yeah," Cole said. His voice came out rougher than usual, like he'd swallowed something sharp. "How do you know that?" "My mom," Ava said. "She used to—" She stopped. Her control was slipping for the first time, something genuine and uncontrolled showing in her face, a child's grief breaking through the surface of the composure she'd been holding for 3 days. She had a picture. One picture. She kept it in the back of a book. I wasn't supposed to see it. A pause. But I did. Cole sat down across from her. Not close, not crowding her, but at the table, level, like he was someone she was allowed to look at directly. He put his hands on the table where she could see them, and she looked at them, and then she looked at his face again. Nobody in the room said anything. Outside, the rain intensified. It hit the roof in a new wave, heavier now, the sound of it filling the room. The wood stove ticked. The neon outside blinked its broken signal into the dark. Aries, 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 and inside, in the warmth and the smoke, a 10-year-old girl who had been holding herself together with both hands for 72 hours was sitting across from a man who had loved her mother and not known for a decade that there was a reason she had left. Jack was already on his phone, not for a personal call. He was texting, fast and precise, the thumb work of a man who had learned to communicate in codes and fragments. He was reaching people he trusted, running the name Dalton through networks that operated well below the official surface. He needed to know what they were dealing with. He needed to know tonight, because tomorrow Child Protective Services would come. And if they came before the club could establish something, any legal hook, any guardianship angle, any piece of paper that put Ava in someone's custody that wasn't the state, the girl would disappear into a system that didn't know what it was carrying or what was hunting it. What Jack didn't know yet, what he would learn in the next few hours in fragments that would arrive like hammer blows, was that Mark Dalton wasn't just a corrupt cop running a side operation. Dalton was the visible edge of something much larger and much older and much more deeply protected, something that had been running for years under the surface of the city and that Sarah Bennett, in her quiet, careful, stubborn way, had accidentally stumbled into the middle of. What she had found, what she had written down and hidden and protected with her body on a dark road on a rainy Monday night, was the kind of evidence that made powerful men nervous, the kind that got people killed, the kind that was, right now, sitting folded in Jack Morrison's jacket pocket while a 10-year-old girl with her mother's eyes drank hot chocolate in a biker clubhouse and rain hammered the world outside, and the clock above the bar ticked toward midnight, and a detective with blood under his expensive suits was, at that exact moment, making phone calls of his own. Reaper pulled Jack aside near the bar, lowered his voice. Jack, if Dalton already knows she was at the hospital, he knows. Then he knows she left before he got there. He's going to be looking. I know. And if this thing with Sarah is what the girl says it is, I know, Reaper. Jack's voice was flat and final. Get Priest on the phone. Tell him I need the legal contact. Tonight. A beat. And get someone on the road back to the hospital. Sarah Bennett, intensive care. I want eyes on that room. Reaper nodded and moved. Jack went back to the table. Ava had finished the hot chocolate. She was sitting straight, both feet flat on the floor, hands in her lap, looking at nothing in particular in the middle distance. Cole hadn't moved. He was still sitting across from her, not talking, just present, in the way of someone who understood that presence was sometimes more important than anything you could say. Jack crouched down to Ava's eye level. We're going to figure this out, he said. I need you to trust me, and I know you have no reason to do that yet, so I'm not asking you to feel it. I'm just asking you to act like it's true for right now while we work. She looked at him, that steady, serious look. My mom trusted you. Yeah, Jack said. She did. Why did she leave? The question landed between them in the firelit air, quiet and enormous. Jack held her gaze and said the most honest thing he knew. I don't know, and I should have asked harder back then. He paused. That's something I'm going to fix. Ava nodded. Not forgiveness, too early for that, too much unknown, but acknowledgement. She filed it away in whatever system a 10-year-old builds when the world has taught her that information is the only currency she can trust. Jack stood up, looked at Cole, who was already looking at him. Something passed between them, the kind of communication that happens between men who have been through enough together that words are mostly ceremonial. Cole said, I'll stay with her. Jack nodded. Then he walked to the far end of the room, pulled out his phone again, and started making the calls that would begin the process of tearing open something that had been buried for a long time, not knowing yet how deep it went or how many bodies were in the ground above it. The rain kept coming. The neon kept blinking. And 3 miles away, in the St. Vincent's Hospital ICU, a machine breathing for Sarah Bennett registered a brief spike in her vitals, a flutter, a change, almost like a response. And a night nurse made a note in the chart that meant nothing to her, but that would mean something later. Just before midnight, Jack's phone lit up with a response from the network he'd queried. 4 words from a man who owed him a debt and never lied. He stared at the screen. Read it twice. Then he walked back to where Reaper was standing and turned the phone so Reaper could see it. Reaper went very still. The 4 words on the screen were, Dalton doesn't work alone. And attached below that, a partial list of names. Names Jack recognized. Names that didn't belong anywhere near a trafficking investigation because some of them were the people who ran the city, who sat on the bench and wrote the checks and shook the hands and smiled at cameras and were apparently part of something monstrous that had been operating right underneath all of them for years. Jack put the phone in his pocket. He looked at Ava across the room, small and rain-drenched, and holding herself together with both hands in the middle of a world that wanted to swallow her. And he thought of Sarah at 19, working the morning shift, bringing coffee she'd already poured before you asked, because she learned things about people the way water finds its level. Without effort, without announcement, simply and completely. He thought about what it meant that Sarah had seen something she shouldn't have seen, and had run, and had spent 9 years hiding, and had finally stopped running for reasons he didn't know yet but would. He thought about the list in his jacket pocket. He He thought about the names on his phone screen. He thought, this is not a thing you walk away from once you know. And Jack Morrison had never in his life walked away from anything that mattered. He went back to the table, pulled up a chair next to Cole, looked at Ava. I need to ask you something, he said, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. He waited. She nodded. Your mother's envelope, but the list she made, was that the only copy? Ava held his gaze for a long moment, and then, very slowly, she reached into her jacket again. Into a different pocket this time, deeper, sewn into the lining. She produced a folded paper, smaller than the first, unfolded it on the table between them. It was a handwritten set of directions, an address, an annotation that read, in Sarah's careful hand, if something happens, this is where the rest of it is. The room went absolutely still. Cole picked up the paper, read it once, set it down, looked at Jack with an expression that said, without any words at all, this just became something much larger than any of us expected. Jack looked at the address, a storage facility on the eastern edge of the city, a unit number, and below that, in Sarah's handwriting, underlined once, they will come for her. They know she saw me find it. The cold that moved through Jack Morrison in that moment had nothing to do with the weather outside. Ava said very quietly, she told me to only show that to someone I trusted completely. A pause. She said I'd know. Jack stared at the paper. 10 years of silence, 9 years of Sarah Bennett building walls and moving through the city like a ghost. 9 years of a secret she'd been carrying alone, and a daughter she'd been carrying alone, and a fear she'd been carrying alone. He said, how did your mother know to trust me? Ava looked at him with those steady dark eyes. She said you were the only one who ever looked for her when she left. A beat. She said you were the only one who looked, and then stopped, when she asked you to. Her voice was very even. She said that was how she knew. Outside, through the rain and the dark and the blinking neon, headlights swept into the gravel lot. Not a Harley. Something quieter. Something that pulled in slow and dark with its headlights cutting across the blacked-out windows. Tiny was at the window before anyone spoke. He turned back, and his face, the large, careful, usually calm face of a man who processed things slowly and correctly, was tight. Jack, he said, we've got a car, parked at the edge of the lot. No plates visible. A pause. Engine still running. The car sat at the edge of the lot like a held breath. Jack moved before anyone else did. Not toward the window. Toward Ava. He put one hand on her shoulder, firm but not rough, and guided her off the chair and behind the bar counter in a single motion that had the muscle memory of someone who had moved civilians out of kill zones before. Cole was already on his feet, positioned between the girl and the door, his body a wall. Tiny, Jack said. Back exit clear? Checked 20 minutes ago. Check again. Tiny moved. The floorboards groaned under his weight as he disappeared into the back hallway, and in the silence that followed, every man in the room was doing the same calculation. Exits, weapons, distance to the door, distance to the vehicles outside. Not panic, training. The kind of reflex that doesn't fade just because you leave the military or the streets or whatever theater of operations installed it in your nervous system in the first place. Reaper had his hand on the .45 tucked into his waistband. He hadn't drawn it. He was standing at the edge of the window, angled so he could see the lot without presenting a silhouette. Still sitting there, he said quietly. One vehicle, sedan, dark color. Can't tell the make in this rain. A beat. Nobody's getting out. Jack crouched behind the bar next to Ava. She was pressed against the lower cabinets, knees to her chest, and she was not crying, and she was not shaking. She was watching Jack's face with the focused attention of someone who had learned that the fastest way to know how afraid to be was to watch the person in charge. This happened before? Jack asked her. Low. Just for her. She nodded once. How many times? 3. Her voice was barely audible. Since my mom went to the hospital. They park outside wherever I am. They don't come in. They just watch. The information rearranged something in Jack's understanding. Not amateurs, not a smash-and-grab operation. Surveillance. patience. The behavior of people operating inside a structure, people who had protocols and chains of command, and the specific arrogance of knowing they had time. Same car? He asked. Different ones. Jack looked at Cole over the bar top. Cole's face was a locked room, but his hands, those scarred, heavy-knuckled hands, were not still. They were opening and closing at his sides in a slow rhythm that Jack recognized as the thing Cole did instead of losing control. A metronome of restraint. They're tracking her, Cole said. Yeah. How, yeah? Jack turned back to Ava. What did you bring with you? Everything. Jacket, shoes, anything in your pockets. She listed it. The jacket, the envelope, the hidden paper with the storage address, a house key on a string around her neck, the revolver, which was still on the table where she'd set it. Phone? I don't have one. Your mother's phone. Ava hesitated. Just a fraction of a second, but Jack caught it the way a man catches a wire in the dark. By feel, by instinct, by the specific quality of the silence that surrounds a lie or an omission. Ava. She reached into her jacket, the deep pocket again, the one sewn into the lining. She produced a phone, older model, cracked screen, powered off. She told me to keep it off, Ava said. She said they could find it if it was on. Has it been on at all since Monday? Another hesitation, longer this time. I turned it on once, at the hospital. I was trying to call someone. Anyone. And I didn't know any numbers except the ones in her phone. She swallowed. It was on for maybe 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Enough. More than enough for anyone with access to cell tower data, which a detective certainly had. Jack took the phone from her, pulled the battery with practiced hands, and set both pieces on the bar shelf. That's how they found the hospital, Cole said from above them. Not accusatory. Just the fact of it, laid flat. She's 10 years old, Cole. I know how old she is. Something in the way he said it, the rawness, the edge that he usually kept filed down, made Jack look up at him again. Cole's jaw was tight. His eyes were fixed on the window where Reaper was still watching the sedan, but he wasn't seeing the window. He was seeing something internal, something that had been locked away and was now pressing against the walls of whatever container he'd built for it. Jack stood up behind the bar, looked at Reaper. Still there? Still there, still nobody getting out. Reaper paused. Jack, if they're just watching, that means they're not here to take her tonight. They're mapping, building a picture. They want to know who she's with. Which means by morning, they'll know she's with us. Which means by morning, this becomes a different conversation. The two men looked at each other across the smoky room, and in that look was the accumulated weight of years, of decisions made and consequences survived, and the specific knowledge that some doors, once opened, don't close again. Jack made the call. We move her, tonight, somewhere they don't know about. Reaper, you and Tiny take her out the back. The cabin up past Ridgemont. Use the logging road, not the highway. Cole, you're with them. Cole shook his head. I'm going to the hospital. The room shifted, not physically, nobody moved, but the energy changed, the way air pressure changes before a storm. No, Jack said. Sarah is lying in a bed 3 miles from here with nobody watching her. I'm sending Priest and Mac to the hospital. You're going with Ava. Send someone else with Ava. Cole, Jack's voice dropped. Not louder, quieter, which was worse. If you're what we think you are, if you're what that list says you might be, then you go where she goes. That's not a request. Cole took a step forward. Just one step, but in the confined space behind the bar, it closed distance in a way that made Reaper's hand tighten on the point 4-5 he hadn't drawn yet. You don't get to tell me what I am based on a list, Cole said. His voice was very controlled, very even, the voice of a man holding something enormous in check with both hands. Not tonight. Not based on a piece of paper I haven't seen. You saw her face, Cole. I saw a kid who walked in out of the rain. You saw Sarah's face, on a child who's the right age, with a list that has your name on it. Jack held his ground. He did not step back. He did not raise his voice. I'm not telling you what to feel. I'm telling you what to do. And right now, What you do is get in a truck with that girl and drive north until I call you. The silence between them lasted 4 seconds. 5. In bar fights, 4 seconds is an eternity. In the space between two men who have bled for each other, deciding whether they are about to stop trusting each other, 4 seconds is a geological age. Cole said, "I'll go." He turned, stopped, without looking back. "But I want to see that list. The full list. Before this night is over." He walked away from the bar and crouched down next to Ava, and his whole bearing changed. The tension stayed in his shoulders, but his face softened, or at least stopped being a weapon, and he said something to her that was too quiet for anyone else to hear. She looked at him, nodded. Jack exhaled, pulled out his phone, started making calls. It took 9 minutes to get Ava out the back. 9 minutes of coordination in the rain, of Tiny pulling a truck around the back of the building with the headlights off, of Reaper checking the alley in both directions, of Cole carrying the girl. She let him carry her, which said something about the calculations she was running, across the muddy ground to the truck cab. 9 minutes during which the dark sedan sat motionless in the front lot, engine running, watching the front of a building while the people it was watching slipped out the back. Jack stood in the doorway and watched the truck's taillights disappear into the rain and the dark, heading north on the back roads, and he thought about the last time he'd watched someone leave this place in the middle of the night and hadn't followed. 9 years ago. Sarah. Same rain, same dark. He'd looked for her, made calls, asked questions, drove routes she might have taken. And then 3 weeks later, a message had come through. Not a phone call, not a letter, just a message relayed through 2 intermediaries. "Please stop looking, please." And he had stopped. Because she'd asked. Because he understood, even then, that some people leave for reasons you don't get to know. He hadn't stopped thinking about her. He'd just stopped acting on it. And now, a decade later, her daughter was in the back of a truck heading into the mountains with a man who might be her father, and Sarah was unconscious in a hospital bed, and a detective with powerful friends was circling, and something buried was breaking the surface, and Jack Morrison was standing in a doorway in the rain, asking himself whether he had been wrong to stop looking all those years ago. Whether his respect for her wishes had been respect or cowardice dressed up as respect. Whether the 9 years she'd spent hiding and the car accident that wasn't an accident and the terrified 10-year-old with a stolen revolver were things that might not have happened if he'd ignored her message and kept looking. That thought settled in his chest like a stone and stayed there. He went back inside. The room was emptier now. 7 men instead of 15, the others deployed to various positions. The dark sedan was still out front. Jack pulled a chair to the center of the room, sat down, lit a cigarette, and looked at the men who were left. "Somebody in this room," he said, "knows more than they've said tonight." Nobody moved. Sarah didn't just disappear. She ran. She ran from something specific, and she ran from someone specific. And she spent 9 years building a life somewhere else with a daughter none of us knew about. He took a drag. Let the smoke out slowly. "I've known every one of you for at least a decade. I've bled with most of you. But I'm sitting here right now with a list of 5 names from this club and a question mark next to each one, and I need to know, right now, tonight, in this room, who was with Sarah before she left." The silence was excruciating. Reaper spoke first. "I wasn't with her, Jack. Not like that. I was married to Diane back then, if you remember, and I was a lot of things, but I wasn't that." Jack looked at him, nodded, moved on. Hatchet, real name David Brennan, a wiry man in his 50s with a face like a topographic map of bad decisions, shifted in his seat. "I took her to dinner once, maybe twice. Nothing happened." A beat. "She wasn't interested." "In you specifically, or in general?" "In me specifically." 2 down. Gage, younger than the others, early 30s, a former Army medic who had joined the club after 2 deployments left him unable to sleep in a house with walls, was staring at his hands. "Jack," he said, very quiet. "I need to tell you something." The room tightened. "I didn't know about any kid." Gage looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, but not from drinking, from something that had been sitting behind them for years, pressing outward. "But I was with Sarah once, one night." He swallowed. About 2 weeks before she disappeared. Jack's expression didn't change. Why didn't you say anything when she left? Because I didn't think it mattered. Because it was one night and she made it clear it was one night, and 2 weeks later she was gone, and I figured... He stopped, rubbed his face with both hands. I figured she left because of me, that I'd done something wrong or pushed too hard or... I don't know. I spent years thinking I was the reason she ran. Were you? I don't know. His voice cracked on the last word. That's the thing, Jack. I don't know. Jack stubbed out the cigarette. Let the silence do its work. Gage was shaking now. Not dramatically. Just a fine tremor in his hands that he was trying to control by pressing them flat against his thighs. The tremor of a man who had been carrying a weight alone for 9 years and had just set it down in a room full of people and was waiting to find out what it cost him. Gage, Jack said, did Sarah tell you anything? About what she was working on? About what she was afraid of? No, nothing. She was quiet. Even that night, she was quiet the whole time, like she was somewhere else. He paused. Like she was making a decision, and I was just the last thing that happened before she made it. The words hung in the room. Every man there understood what Gage was describing. The experience of being close to someone who was already gone, already somewhere else in their mind, already running even while they were standing still. Jack filed it, moved on. 2 more names on the list. Before he could ask, his phone buzzed. A text from Priest, who was en route to the hospital with Mac. He read it again. Priest says St. Vincent's transferred Sarah Bennett 2 hours ago, Jack said, and his voice had gone flat in a way that made everyone in the room stop breathing. She's not there anymore. They moved her to a different facility. What facility? Priest can't get the information. The transfer was flagged as confidential. A beat. Ordered by the attending physician. Who's the attending? Jack looked at his phone. Dr. Marcus Webb. The name produced no immediate reaction. None of them knew it. But Jack was already texting, already running it through the same network that had given him the list of names an hour earlier, and the speed of his thumbs said he understood something the others hadn't caught yet. Hospitals don't transfer critical patients in the middle of the night under confidential orders unless someone with authority wants that patient somewhere specific, somewhere controlled, somewhere the wrong people can't reach her and the right people, depending on your definition of right, can. Sarah Bennett had been moved like a chess piece by someone who was playing a game none of them fully understood yet. Reaper was at Jack's shoulder. If they moved her to isolate her, cut off access. I know. Which means they know the girl came to us. I know. Which means, Reaper lowered his voice, which means whatever Sarah found, whatever she hid in that storage unit, they know it exists and they're trying to get to it before we do. Jack looked at him. Get me a team, 4 guys, armed. We go to that storage unit tonight. Jack, if they're watching us, they're watching the front of this building. They don't know about the back exit or they'd have covered it. We have a window. It's small and it's closing. He stood up. 4 guys. Gage, you're on it. He looked at the younger man. You want to prove something? Here's your chance. Gage nodded. Once, hard. The tremor in his hands stopped. It was 1:40 in the morning when Jack, Reaper, Gage, and Hatchet rolled out the back of the clubhouse on 2 Harleys with the pipes wrapped to muffle the sound. Not silent. Nothing with a Harley engine is ever silent, but quieter. A growl instead of a roar, enough to slip through the rain in the dark without announcing themselves to the sedan out front. The storage facility was on the eastern edge of the city, in the kind of industrial district that exists between the parts of a city that work and the parts that have been abandoned, chain-link fences and loading docks, and the ghosts of businesses that failed in the last recession. The rain had turned the access road into a shallow river. Their headlights cut through the dark and hit the rows of storage units, identical orange doors stretching in long lines under sodium lights that gave everything the color of something bruised. Unit 1, 137. Jack got off the bike, stood in the rain for a moment, letting the water run down his face, and looked at the padlocked unit. Sarah's handwriting on the paper in his pocket. Her careful instructions. A decade of hiding, distilled into an address and a unit number, and the faint, desperate hope that if everything went wrong, someone she trusted would find their way here. He cut the lock with bolt cutters Hatchet had brought, rolled the door up. The unit was small, 10 by 10 maybe. Inside, cardboard boxes, a filing cabinet, a laptop sealed in a plastic bag. Everything organized with the obsessive neatness of someone who knew this might need to be understood by a stranger in an emergency. Jack stepped inside. Gage stood watch at the door, eyes scanning the access road. Reaper began opening boxes. The first box contained documents, photocopies of official forms, foster care placement records, adoption processing paperwork, court orders, names of children, dates, locations. Some of the names had been circled in red. The second box contained photographs, surveillance photos taken from a distance, men in suits entering and leaving a building Jack didn't recognize, license plates, timestamps, the kind of documentation that said someone had been very patient and very careful and very afraid. The third box was smaller. Inside it, wrapped in a plastic sleeve, was a USB drive and a handwritten note in Sarah's writing. Jack read the note. His face didn't change. His body didn't move. But something behind his eyes went dark and cold, the way lights go out in a building when the main breaker trips. Not one at a time, but all at once, the whole structure going dark. He folded the note, put it in his pocket next to the list. "What's it say?" Reaper asked. "It says we're in the middle of something that goes a lot higher than a detective." Jack's voice was a flat line. Sarah spent 2 years documenting a network that takes children from the foster care system and sells them. Adoption agencies, private placements, kids who go into the system and don't come out, kids who get placed with families that don't exist. He paused. And the man running it, the man at the top, isn't Dalton. Then who? Jack looked at him. Richard Carlisle. Reaper knew the name. Everyone in Portland knew the name, or at least the public version of it. The philanthropist, the fundraiser, the man whose face appeared in newspaper society pages next to governors and district attorneys and police chiefs. The man who donated to children's hospitals and sat on the boards of foster care agencies and smiled in photographs with the specific practiced warmth of someone who had learned to perform generosity as camouflage. "That's," Reaper started. "Yeah." "Jack, if Carlisle is, yeah, then we're not fighting a cop. We're fighting the entire system, judges, prosecutors, the department, everyone." Jack picked up the box of documents, the laptop, the USB drive, carried them out of the unit and loaded them into the saddlebag on his Harley. The rain hit the leather. The orange storage doors stretched away in both directions under the sodium lights, and the night was very large and very dark, and the four of them stood in the middle of it with evidence of something monstrous. Gage said, "Jack, there were names in those files, kids' names." His voice had the particular quality of a man who had seen combat and thought he understood the worst of what people could do and was now discovering he had been wrong. Dates going back years. "I know. Some of those kids, they have to be." "I know, Gage." Jack's phone buzzed. Cole. He answered, listened for 30 seconds. His jaw tightened. He said, "Say that again." Cole's voice came through the speaker, barely audible over the rain. "I said she's talking. Ava, she told me something she didn't tell anyone at the clubhouse." A pause. Static. Rain. "Jack, Sarah didn't just find documents. She found the children. Physically. She found where they were being held. A house. A basement. She was there. She saw them." Jack closed his eyes. Opened them. "And Ava?" he said. Ava was with her. The silence on the line stretched. The rain came down. Somewhere in the hills north of the city, in a cabin on a logging road, a 10-year-old girl was telling a man who might be her father that she had seen something no child should ever see. And somewhere else, in an office, in a house, in a room that smelled of expensive things, a man named Richard Carroll was being told that the biker club had the girl and that the storage unit had been accessed and that the situation had changed. Jack put the phone in his pocket, looked at Reaper and Gage and Hatchet, 3 men standing in the rain outside a storage unit that contained enough evidence to burn a city to the ground. "There's no walking away from this," he said. "You understand that. Once we move on this, Once Carol knows we have what Sarah collected, he'll come for us. All of us. Everything we have, everyone we care about. Reaper said, "We're already in it, Jack. I need to hear you say it, each of you, because what happens next doesn't have a reverse gear." Reaper, "I'm in." Gage without hesitation, "I'm in." Hatchet looked at the storage unit, looked at the boxes, looked at Jack. "My daughter's 6, he said quietly. "Some of those names in that box, some of those kids are her age." He pulled his collar up against the rain. "I was in before you asked." Jack nodded. He swung a leg over his Harley, and the engine caught with a sound that split the night open, and the 3 others followed, and they rode out of the storage facility into the rain and the dark, with the evidence packed against their bodies like something alive, something that needed protecting. Behind them, 200 yards back, a set of headlights turned onto the access road. Following. And 30 miles north, in the cabin at the end of the logging road, Cole Martinez sat on the floor across from Ava Bennett while she told him, in the halting, careful, terrible way that children describe things they were never supposed to see, about the basement, and the locked doors, and the sound of children crying behind them, and her mother's face when she realized what she'd found. Cole listened. He did not interrupt. He did not look away. He sat with his hands on his knees and his back against the wall, and he absorbed every word she said, and with each word something inside him changed. Not broke, because Cole Martinez had been broken and rebuilt so many times that breaking was just another form of maintenance, but shifted the way tectonic plates shift, slow and massive and irreversible, rearranging the fundamental geography of who he was and what he was willing to do about it. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Nobody's touching you. You understand me?" "Nobody." She looked at him. "I don't care who they are. I don't care how many. I don't care what it costs." His voice was even. Not angry, past angry, in the territory beyond anger where things get very simple and very clear. "You walked into that clubhouse tonight and you changed everything, and you don't even know it yet, but you did. And the thing you changed doesn't go back." Outside, the rain hammered the cabin roof, and the trees bent in the wind, and somewhere on the highway below, headlights were moving north, coming for them. The headlights stayed 200 yards back. Jack saw them first in his side mirror. A steady glow cutting through the rain, maintaining distance with the disciplined patience of someone who had been trained to follow without closing. Not rushing, not falling behind, just there, a presence, a promise of something coming that hadn't arrived yet. He signaled Reaper with a hand gesture they'd used for 12 years. 2 fingers, tap the thigh, then point right. Reaper acknowledged with a nod barely visible through the rain and adjusted his speed, drifting to the outside lane. Hatchet fell in behind Jack. Gage brought up the rear, his eyes on the mirror more than the road. 4 Harleys on a rain-soaked highway at 2 in the morning, carrying evidence of something monstrous in saddlebags pressed against their bodies, being followed by someone who knew exactly where they'd been and didn't care that they knew they were being followed. That last part was what bothered Jack. A tale that doesn't care about being spotted isn't gathering information. It's delivering a message. And the message was simple. We see you. We know what you took. And it doesn't matter. They hit the industrial overpass where Route 9 crosses the freight rail line, and Jack made a decision. He throttled hard, the Harleys surging forward with a roar that tore through the night, and cut across 2 lanes to the exit ramp that dropped down toward the waterfront district. Reaper followed, Hatchet followed, Gage came last, and as he took the exit, he looked back and saw the headlights slow, hold at the overpass for 3 seconds, just long enough to be deliberate, and then continue straight, disappearing into the highway dark. They didn't follow. They didn't need to. Jack pulled into the parking structure beneath the old cannery building on Dock Street, a place the club used for things that needed walls and a roof and no witnesses. He killed the engine and sat for a moment in the sudden silence, rain dripping from his jacket, his hands still on the handlebars. The parking structure smelled of damp concrete and old oil and the river. Reaper pulled in beside him, killed his engine, pulled off his helmet. "They let us go," Reaper said. "Yeah. That means they already know where we're headed, or they don't care where we go because they've got something else." Jack didn't answer. He swung off the bike, pulled the saddlebag open and removed the box of documents and the sealed laptop and the USB drive, held them against his chest, stood in the parking structure under the fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered like insects dying, and he looked at the evidence Sarah Bennett had spent 2 years of her life collecting at the cost of everything she had. His phone buzzed, text from Priest at the hospital. He read it, and his face went still in a way that made Reaper take a step closer. "What?" Jack turned the phone so Reaper could see. The text read, "Webb is gone. Attending physician Marcus Webb signed off Sarah's transfer at 11:47 p.m., then clocked out and hasn't been seen since. His home address is empty. Car still in the hospital lot." Phone goes straight to voicemail. Reaper said, "A doctor doesn't disappear unless someone disappears him. Or unless he's running." From what? From us. From Kirill. From the fact that he just moved a critical patient in the middle of the night on someone's orders, and now he's realizing what that makes him. Jack put the phone away. "We need to find Webb before Carol does. A doctor who's scared is a doctor who talks." He pulled out the note Sarah had written, the one from the storage unit, the one that had changed something behind his eyes when he first read it. He'd kept its contents to himself. He needed time to process what it said. But time was a currency they were running out of. "There's something I haven't told you," Jack said. Reaper waited. Jack unfolded the note. The handwriting was tight, cramped, the penmanship of someone writing in poor light or in fear, or both. He read it aloud, his voice flat, stripping the words of everything but their meaning. "Jack, if you're reading this, I'm either dead or close to it. The man who runs the network is Richard Carlisle. You'll know the name. Everyone in Portland knows the name. What they don't know is that Carroll has people inside the police, the courts, and the foster system. He has a doctor, Marcus Webb, who handles the medical paperwork to move children through the system without flags. He has a detective, Mark Dalton, who handles anyone who gets too close. And he has someone inside your club." The last sentence landed like a gunshot in the concrete parking structure. Reaper didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there with the rain still dripping from his leather jacket and processed the information with the specific stillness of a man who has just been told that the ground he's standing on isn't solid. "I don't know who," Jack continued reading. "I only know because Dalton mentioned it, once, to someone on the phone. He said Carlisle had eyes inside the Devil's Run. He didn't say a name. I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you 10 years ago, but I didn't know who to trust, and I couldn't risk Ava. I ran because running was the only thing that kept her safe. Please keep her safe now, please." Jack folded the note and put it back in his pocket. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Gage and Hatchet had heard everything. They stood 10 feet away near their bikes, and the silence between the four of them was the kind that corrodes, the kind that turns brotherhood into suspicion and trust into a liability. Reaper spoke first. "Someone inside the club. That's what she wrote. And you believe her?" Sarah Bennett spent 2 years documenting a trafficking network while raising a daughter alone and running from a corrupt cop. She didn't write things down that weren't true. Jack's voice was steady. "Someone in our club is feeding information to Kirill, which means someone in our club knew Sarah was getting close, and someone in our club may have been involved in what happened to her on Monday night." The words sat in the air between them, toxic and heavy. Gage was looking at his hands again, the same hands that had trembled at the clubhouse, now clenched into fists at his sides. Hatchet's face was the face of a man doing math he didn't want to do, running through the roster of every member, every prospect, every associate, measuring each one against this new information. Reaper said, "How many people knew about the cabin?" The question was surgical. Jack looked at him. "What?" "The cabin up past Ridgemont, where we sent Ava and Cole. How many people knew about it?" "Everyone who was at the clubhouse tonight." "Which is 15 men." "Yeah." "And one of those 15 might be working for Kirill." The implication unfolded like a wound opening. Cole was at the cabin with Ava. Tiny was with them. If the person feeding information to Carol was one of the men who'd been at the clubhouse, if that person had heard Jack give the order to take Ava to the Ridgemont cabin, then Carol already knew where the girl was. Jack's phone was in his hand before the thought finished forming. He called Cole. 1 ring, 2, 3, 4, voicemail. He called again, voicemail. He called Tiny. Voicemail. Reaper watched Jack's face and understood everything from the way it didn't change, the way it went completely neutral, completely flat, the expression of a man who is calculating the distance between where he is and where he needs to be and the things he'll have to do to close that gap. "How far to the cabin?" Reaper said. 32 miles, 40 minutes in this rain. Then we go now. If we're being watched, we go now, Jack? They went. 4 Harleys out of the parking structure, engines opening up on the empty streets, the sound of them rolling off the waterfront buildings, and the river and the dark. Jack rode lead with the saddlebag of evidence strapped tight against his back, and the rain hit his face, and his hands were numb on the grips, and the highway opened north before them like a throat. He rode faster than was safe, faster than the tires wanted to grip on the wet asphalt. Faster than anything but the specific fear that was eating a hole in his chest. The fear that he had sent a child into the mountains with a protector and a target on her back, and had then announced her location to a room that might contain the person hunting her. 20 minutes in, his phone vibrated in his jacket. He couldn't answer at speed in the rain. He pulled off at a gas station that was closed for the night. The pump standing dark and silent under a canopy that provided 3 seconds of relief from the downpour, and he pulled his phone out with shaking hands. Text from Cole. 2 words, "We're moving." Jack called him. This time Cole answered on the first ring. "Where?" Jack said. "Headlights on the logging road. 2 vehicles. Coming up from the south." Cole's voice was the flat, clipped tone of a man in operational mode. No emotion, no filler, just data. "Tiny and I got Ava out the back. We're on foot in the woods heading northeast. No vehicle. Phone's about to die." "How far behind you?" 10 minutes, maybe less." "How's the girl?" A pause. The briefest softening. "She's not slowing us down." "Cole, listen to me. There's someone inside the club feeding Carol information. I don't know who. That's how they found the cabin." Silence on the line. Then, "You're sure?" "Sarah wrote it down. Years ago. She knew." Another silence. Longer this time, carrying the weight of a man recalculating every relationship he's had for the past decade through the lens of this information. "Okay," Cole said finally. "Okay." The word doing double duty, acknowledgement and acceptance, the verbal equivalent of locking a door and turning to face whatever was on the other side. "I'm 40 minutes out," Jack said. "Head toward the Miller Creek crossing, the old footbridge, you know the one." "I know it. I'll be there." The line went dead. Whether the phone died or Cole ended the call, Jack couldn't tell. He stood under the gas station canopy and listened to the rain and felt the distance between himself and that footbridge like a physical thing, a wire pulled taut across his chest. Reaper was beside him. "We'll make it. In time. We'll make it." Jack looked at him, at this man he'd known for 15 years who'd been beside him through things that had no names and left marks that didn't show. And for the first time in a long time, he asked himself whether he could trust the person standing in front of him, whether the face he was looking at was the same face it had always been, or whether something behind it had changed at some point without him noticing. The question was acid. It burned everything it touched, and the worst part was that he had to ask it about every one of them, every brother, every man who wore the patch, because Sarah's note didn't name the traitor, and until he found out who it was, the Brotherhood itself was compromised. He got back on the bike. They rode. The road into the mountains narrowed from highway to 2-lane, to a thing that was barely a road at all, cracked asphalt giving way to gravel, and then to dirt that the rain had turned to soup. Jack's Harley wasn't built for this. None of their bikes were, but he pushed it anyway, the rear tire sliding on the mud, the engine laboring on the grade, and the forest closing in on both sides, dark and wet and old. At the trailhead, where the logging road met the Forest Service path, they stashed the bikes in the trees and went on foot. Jack carried the saddlebag over one shoulder. Reaper had his .45 out, safety off. Gage carried a shotgun he'd pulled from a saddle mount. Hatchet had a hunting knife and a flashlight, and the specific calm of a man who had done things in the dark before and wasn't afraid of doing them again. They moved through the woods without speaking. The rain filtered through the canopy and hit them in cold, irregular drops, and the ground underfoot was a carpet of wet pine needles and mud, and their boots made sounds that the forest absorbed. 20 minutes of walking. Jack navigating by memory, by the specific geography of a landscape he'd known for decades. This tree, that rock formation, the way the creek sounds change when you're within a quarter mile of the footbridge. He heard the water first. Then he saw the bridge, a wooden footspan across Miller Creek, old but solid, the kind of structure that outlasts the people who built it, and on the far side, barely visible in the dark, 3 figures. Cole, tiny, and between them, small and mud-streaked and moving under her own power, Ava. Jack crossed the bridge. The wood creaked under his boots. Cole met him on the other side with a face that had been rearranged by the last hour. Not broken, but harder, sharper, the edges filed down to something that could cut. They hit the cabin, Cole said. 4 men. Not cops. Professional. Tactical gear. Suppressed weapons. They breached the front and back simultaneously. His breathing was controlled but heavy. He'd been moving fast through rough terrain carrying a child's weight. If Ava hadn't heard the engines early, if she hadn't said something, we'd have been in there. Jack looked at Ava. She was standing between Cole and Tiny, and she was covered in mud up to her knees, and her face was white in the dark. And she was looking at Jack with an expression that didn't belong on a 10-year-old's face. It was the expression of someone who understands that the adults around her are also afraid, and who is recalibrating everything she knows about safety based on that understanding. "You heard the engines," Jack said to her. She nodded. "My mom taught me to listen. She said engines at night on a road that goes nowhere mean someone's coming who shouldn't be." Sarah. Even from a hospital bed, from years of careful, frightened preparation, still protecting her daughter through lessons embedded so deep they'd become reflex. Tiny said, "Jack, there's something else." The big man's voice was wrong. It had a quality Jack had never heard in it before, a thickness, like he was speaking through something that didn't want to let the words out. "When we were leaving the cabin, through the back, I saw one of them." "Saw who?" "One of the men who breached." His mask slipped. When he came around the corner and Ava screamed, it startled him and he pulled at his balaclava, and for a second I saw his face. Tiny paused. His massive hands were trembling. "Jack, it was Bowie." The name hit the group like a concussion wave. Bowie. Real name Stephen Bowman. 7-year member of the Devil's Run MC. Quiet. Reliable. Never missed a vote, never started trouble, never drew attention to himself. He'd been at the clubhouse tonight. He'd heard every word. He'd watched Jack send Ava to the cabin, and he'd watched from the back of the room with the same calm expression he always wore. And then he'd made a phone call. Reaper said, "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Tiny's voice cracked on the word. Not from doubt, from the grief of it, the betrayal. "I've looked at that face across tables and bar tops for 7 years, I'm sure." Jack stood very still in the rain. The creek rushed beneath the footbridge, the trees bent overhead, and something inside him, something that had held together through 2 wars and 15 years of running an outlaw club, and every kind of violence and loss that comes with that life, something fractured. Not visibly, not dramatically. Just a quiet internal shift, a load-bearing wall developing a crack that wouldn't heal. Bowie had been at the clubhouse when Sarah first disappeared 9 years ago. Bowie had been privy to club business, club movements, club decisions for 7 years. 7 years of information flowing outward to Kirill through a man they trusted, a man who sat at their table and wore their patch and called them brothers while selling the people they were supposed to protect. Jack thought about every close call the club had had in the past 7 years, every deal that went sideways at the last minute, every piece of bad luck that had felt a little too precise to be luck, every time they'd planned something in private and found the opposition already waiting. He thought about how Dalton had always seemed to know just a little too much. He thought about how Carlisle's network had survived for years in a city where the Devil's Run controlled enough of the underground to have noticed, should have noticed, Something this large operating in their territory. It had survived because someone was making sure they never looked in the right direction. The math was devastating. Jack, Cole said, we need to decide. Right now, tonight. Decide what? Whether we go to war. Not with Dalton. Not with Carol's hired guns. Cole stepped closer. With the whole thing, the network, the operation, the men protecting it. He looked at Ava, then back at Jack. That girl saw a basement full of children. She saw their faces. She knows where it is. And Corral knows she knows. A beat. He's not going to stop. You understand that. He can't afford to. As long as she's alive and as long as Sarah's evidence exists, he's exposed. So he will send everything he has to every cop on his payroll, every contractor, every Bowie he's got planted in every corner, until he gets what he needs. What does he need? The evidence destroyed, the girl silenced, and us in the ground. Jack looked at the forest around them, at the dark, at the rain that wouldn't stop, at the 4 men and 1 child standing on a creek bank in the mountains in the middle of the night. He thought about what it meant to go to war with something this size. Not a rival club, not a drug supplier, not a street-level problem that could be solved with fists and intimidation. This was institutional, structural, protected by the same systems that were supposed to protect people like Ava, the police, the courts, the agencies designed to keep children safe. The whole machine corrupted. And the only people who knew it were standing in the mud. Jack said, we can't fight them the way we fight. Not fists, not bikes, not intimidation. He looked at Cole. We need to find Webb, the doctor who transferred Sarah. He's the weak link in Carol's operation, a civilian, a professional, someone who got pulled into this and is now running scared. If we get to him before Corral does, he talks. He gives us the inside, locations, names, the structure. And then what? And then we take it apart. How? Jack reached into the saddlebag and pulled out the USB drive from Sarah's storage unit, held it up. Sarah spent 2 years building a case. She did the work we should have done. She documented everything. The children, the placements, the money, the people. This drive has enough on it to destroy Kirill if it gets to the right hands. What right hands? Reaper said. You just said the cops are compromised. The courts are compromised. Not all of them. There's a federal prosecutor saying someone Sarah names in her notes, someone she was trying to reach before Monday night, someone outside the local system. Jack paused. We find Webb. We get the location of where the children are being held. We copy this evidence and send it to the prosecutor, and then we go get those kids ourselves. The words landed in the rain and the dark, and every man there felt the weight of them. Not a plan, not yet, but the shape of one. The skeleton of something that would require everything they had, and probably more. Cole said, You're asking us to raid a trafficking compound. I'm asking us to be the people Sarah believed we were when she sent her daughter to our door. Cole looked at Ava. The girl was watching him with those dark, steady eyes. Sarah's eyes. The eyes that had looked at him once a decade ago with something that might have been love and might have been farewell and had turned out to be both. She was shaking. Not from fear, from cold, from exhaustion, from the sustained effort of holding herself together through a night that had demanded more from her than any child should ever have to give. He took off his leather jacket, wrapped it around her shoulders. It was enormous on her. The sleeves hung past her hands, the hem reached her knees. But the warmth was immediate, and the weight of it, and the smell of leather, and engine oil, and something that was specifically coal. And she pulled it tight around herself and looked up at him. He put one hand on top of her head, just rested it there. A gesture that said nothing and everything. Okay, he said. And the way he said it, the finality, the quiet devastation, the acceptance of something that could not be undone, changed him. Not later. Not gradually. Right then, standing on a creek bank in the rain with his jacket on a child who might be his daughter and the evidence of something unforgivable in a bag at his feet. The man who walked away from that creek would not be the same man who had walked to it. Something in him had reorganized. Something that had been optional. Love, responsibility, the willingness to die for a reason instead of for nothing had become structural. load-bearing, the thing he was built around instead of the thing he kept at arm's length. Jack saw it happen. He'd seen it before, in combat, in crisis. The moment a man finds the thing he didn't know he was looking for and becomes something different because of it. Usually it happened once in a life, if it happened at all. He nodded at Cole. Cole nodded back. And in that exchange, 2 nods, no words, in the rain and the dark, the war began. Jack's phone buzzed one final time that night. A text from an unknown number. No sender. No signature. 6 words. Give her back. Last chance. See. Jack read it, turned the phone so the others could see. Then he typed a response. 3 words. And hit send. Come get her. He pocketed the phone, looked at his men, looked at Ava, wrapped in Cole's jacket, standing in the mud between protectors who had just decided to become something more than outlaws. We move, Jack said. Now, before dawn. We find Webb, we find the compound, and we finish what Sarah started. They walked into the trees. 5 adults, 1 child. Heading down the mountain toward a war they couldn't win by any measure that the world outside would recognize. Outgunned, outnumbered, hunted by men with badges and money and the machinery of a system that had been built, supposedly, to protect the innocent. And behind them, on the logging road that led to the cabin they'd fled, the headlights of Carol's men swept the empty rooms and found nothing but cold coffee and the fading warmth of bodies that had been there minutes before. And one of those men, a man named Stephen Bowman, who wore a Devil's Run patch on a jacket that didn't belong to him anymore, picked up a child's hair tie from the cabin floor and called a number and said, "They're gone, all of them," and Morrison texted back. A pause on the other end. Then a voice, calm, polished, with the practiced warmth of a man who had spent decades learning to sound kind while doing unspeakable things, said, "What did he say?" Bowie read the 3 words. The line was quiet for 5 seconds. "Well," Richard Carroll said, "then we do this the other way." And somewhere on a mountainside, moving through rain and dark, and the oldest kind of fear, the fear that you have started something you cannot stop, Jack Morrison carried evidence against his chest and a child's trust on his shoulders and walked toward something he couldn't see the end of, knowing only that the man behind him had just changed, and the men beside him had just chosen, and the girl between them had just become the most dangerous thing in Portland, a witness who was still alive. They found Dr. Marcus Webb at 4:17 in the morning, hiding inside a storage closet at the Greyhound station on the east side of Portland. Jack had called in every favor the club had left, every contact in the city's underworld who owed Devil's Run something, every bartender and night shift worker and parking attendant who had been paid or protected or simply treated with enough basic decency over the years to answer a phone call at 3 in the morning. The network was analog and slow and imperfect, but it worked the way it had always worked. Somebody knew somebody who saw somebody, and word traveled from mouth to ear to phone to Jack's screen in fragments that assembled into a picture. Webb had taken a cab from the hospital to his house, stayed 11 minutes, left with a duffel bag, took a second cab to a motel on Powell Boulevard, checked in under a false name, stayed 40 minutes without sleeping. The night clerk said the light was on the whole time and someone was pacing, then left on foot and walked 19 blocks to the bus station. He was trying to run. He was doing it badly. Jack left Ava at a safe house, a basement apartment beneath a tattoo parlor owned by a woman named Ray, who had no connection to the club beyond the fact that Jack had once kept her brother out of prison, and she had never forgotten it. Cole stayed with the girl. He did not argue this time. He sat in a folding chair next to the door with a shotgun across his knees and an expression that said the next person through that door who wasn't Jack Morrison would have a very short evening. Tiny stayed too. The big man positioned himself at the top of the stairs like a human barricade, and when Ava looked up at him with those tired, dark eyes, he said, "Nobody's getting past me, kid. Not tonight, not ever." And he said it with such simple conviction that she almost smiled. Almost. Jack took Reaper, Gage, and Hatchet to the bus station. The Greyhound terminal at 4 in the morning is a specific kind of American purgatory. Fluorescent lights that make everyone look sick, plastic chairs bolted to the floor, the smell of floor cleaner and diesel, and the particular exhaustion of people whose lives have narrowed to the next departure. A security guard sat at a desk near the entrance doing nothing. A janitor pushed a mop across the same section of floor he'd been pushing it across for an hour. 3 travelers slept sitting up in the waiting area, their luggage between their feet. Webb wasn't in the terminal. He was in the maintenance hallway behind the ticket counter, in a storage closet with the door closed, sitting on an overturned bucket with his duffel bag between his knees and his phone in his hands, scrolling through something with the frantic repetition of a man looking for an answer that doesn't exist. Jack opened the door without knocking. Webb looked up and made a sound. Not a word, just a noise. The involuntary vocalization of a man whose nervous system had been running on maximum alert for hours and had just received one more shock than it could process. He was mid-40s, thin, with the soft hands and precise haircut of a man who had built his life inside clean, controlled environments and was now discovering what happened when those environments collapsed. "Dr. Webb," Jack said. Who are—" Webb scrambled backward on the bucket, his shoes scraping the concrete floor. The duffel bag fell. His phone clattered. "I'll call the police." "The police are the reason you're in a closet at 4 in the morning. Jack stepped inside. He didn't close the door. He left it open behind him, visible, the hallway and the exit in plain sight. Not a cage. A conversation. "You know who I am." Webb's eyes moved over Jack's face, his jacket, the Devil's Run patch. Recognition and terror arrived simultaneously. "Morrison." "Yeah. I don't know anything about—" "You transferred Sarah Bennett from St. Vincent's at 11:47 tonight. Confidential transfer. Then you disappeared." Jack's voice was level. Not threatening. Worse than threatening. Patient. "Where is she?" Webb's hands were shaking. Not the fine tremor of adrenaline, but the full-body shake of a man whose autonomic nervous system had been overloaded for hours. His face was gray under the fluorescent light. His eyes kept going to the open door behind Jack, calculating distance, calculating odds. "I can't tell you that." "You can, and you're going to." "You don't understand what—" Webb stopped, swallowed, started again. "If I tell you where she is, he'll know. He'll know it came from me, and then "You're already dead, Marcus." Jack said it without cruelty. Just fact, the way you tell someone the weather. "You moved a patient in the middle of the night on Carlisle's orders, and now you're sitting in a bus station closet because you finally figured out what that makes you. A liability. The kind of person Richard Carroll cleans up when the operation gets complicated." He paused. "You're not running from us. You're running from him. And there's no bus that goes far enough." Webb's face collapsed. Not all at once. In stages, the way a structure fails, one support giving way, and then the next, until the whole thing comes down. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. He said it was a routine transfer. When he first called, years ago, the first time, he said he needed a physician to sign off on placement physicals for foster children. Quick exams, standard paperwork. His voice was thin. "I didn't know what it was." "When did you know?" Webb looked at his hands, those clean, precise, surgeon's hands. 6 months in, maybe 8. The children started. Some of them came through more than once. Different names, different placements, and some of them had injuries that didn't match the histories I was given. A pause. I asked questions. Once, Dalton came to my office the next day. He didn't threaten me. He showed me photographs of my daughter at her school, walking home in our backyard. His voice broke. "She's 14. The closet was very quiet. Jack said, "Where is Sarah Bennett right now?" "Pinecrest, private recovery facility. East of the city, up in the hills. It's not a real medical facility. Corral owns it. Uses it for people who need to disappear from public hospitals. People who know too much or saw too much." Webb looked up. His eyes were wet. "She's alive. As far as I know, she's alive. But she won't be for long. Carroll wants whatever she has, whatever evidence. And once he gets it, or once he's sure it's been destroyed, she becomes unnecessary." "How many people guarding the facility?" "I don't know. I've only been there twice. There were always men. Armed. 6, 8. I don't know." "And the compound, the one where the children are held?" Webb went still. A different kind of still from before, not fear but recognition, The specific recoil of a man who has just realized that the person in front of him knows more than expected. How do you... Sarah found it. She was there. Her daughter was with her. Jack took one step closer. Not aggressive, just closer. Close enough that Webb could see his eyes and the things that lived in them. Where? Webb's mouth worked for a moment with nothing coming out. Then, Carlisle has a property, an estate, up in the hills south of the city. Timber company land. Private roads, no public access, gated. The main house it's a mansion, the kind of place he brings donors and politicians for parties. But beneath it, underneath the east wing, there's a basement level that doesn't appear on any building permit. He paused. That's where the children are held, before they're moved. How many children? It varies. When I was last there, 2 months ago, there were 12, maybe 15. Different ages. His voice had gone mechanical, reciting facts to avoid feeling them. They're kept sedated for transport. I provided the medications. He looked at Jack. I provided the medications. The admission hung in the air. Not a confession, an indictment. Of himself by himself. Jack said, "You're going to help us get them out." "I can't. You're going to draw the layout of that estate. Every entrance, every exit, the security setup, the basement access. Where the children are held, how many guards, how they rotate." Jack's voice was iron. "And then you're going to come with us. Because those kids are sedated with drugs you prescribed, and they're going to need a doctor when we move them." Webb stared at him. The terror in his face was being replaced by something else. Not courage, nothing that clean, but a kind of desperate arithmetic. The calculation of a man who can see that every path leads through fire and is trying to find the one that burns the least. "He'll kill my daughter," Webb whispered. "Give me her name and her address. I'll have people at her house within the hour." "You can't. We've been protecting people since before Carlisle knew your name. Give me the address." Webb gave it. Jack texted it to Priest with instructions that left no room for interpretation. Then he pulled a pen from his jacket and a flattened paper bag from the closet shelf and set them in front of Webb. "Draw," he said. Webb drew. His hands shook, but the lines were precise. The hands of a surgeon, trained to be steady even when the rest of him wasn't. The estate took shape on the paper bag. A main house, 2 stories, with an east wing and a west wing. A long driveway from a gated entrance. Guard positions marked with X's. The basement access. A reinforced door inside the east wing's ground floor corridor, leading down a staircase to a lower level that contained 8 rooms. Cell-like. Locked from outside. Camera positions. Motion sensors along the perimeter fence. A generator building 50 yards from the main house. 2 guard vehicles always parked at the front. Jack studied the drawing. Reaper studied it over his shoulder. Gage memorized it. The medic's brain. Trained to absorb layouts and environments quickly in case of casualty evacuation. "How many guards total?" Jack said. "At night? Usually 10, maybe 12. They work in shifts, 4 at the gate and perimeter. 4 inside the house. 2 or 3 at the basement level." Webb paused. "They're not amateurs, they're..." Dalton uses private military contractors. Ex-military. Armed. Jack folded the drawing and put it in his jacket. "Where does Carol sleep?" "Main house, 2nd floor, the master suite, west wing." "Is he there now?" "I don't know. He was in the city yesterday, for a fundraiser." Webb laughed. A terrible sound, hollow, the laugh of a man who can hear the absurdity of what he's describing. "A children's charity fundraiser." Jack didn't react. He turned to Reaper. "Call everyone in, every member, every prospect who can hold a weapon and follow an order. I want everyone at the cannery by 5:30. "Jack? If Bowie is Carol's man inside the club, calling everyone in means calling Bowie in." "I know. He'll alert Carlisle. I'm counting on it." Jack looked at Reaper, and something in his expression, something calculated and cold and very far from the reactive emotional decisions of the night, communicated that Jack Morrison had been thinking 3 moves ahead for the last hour and was only now letting the plan surface. "I want Carlisle to know we're coming. I want him to pull every resource he has to that estate, Every guard, every contractor, every cop on his payroll. I want them all in one place. Why? Because while they're waiting for us at the estate, Cole is going to be at Pinecrest getting Sarah out. And while they're fighting us at the gates, Gage is going to be in the basement getting the children out. He paused. And while all of that is happening, a copy of everything on Sarah's USB drive is going to land in a federal prosecutor's inbox. The plan was insane. It was outnumbered and outgunned and relied on timing that had no margin for error. It was the kind of plan that got people killed. Reaper said, "Okay." That was all. Okay. The way men say okay when the options have been reduced to one and the only question left is whether you move forward or stop moving entirely. Jack pulled Webb to his feet. "You're coming with us." "I know," Webb said, and in his voice, beneath the fear, beneath the self-loathing, beneath the years of complicity, was something that sounded almost like relief. The relief of a man who had been holding a terrible secret and was finally being forced to let go of it, even if letting go meant falling. They assembled at the cannery in the pre-dawn dark. 19 men, not the full roster. Some were too far away, some couldn't be reached, but 19 men standing in a circle under the fluorescent lights of the old processing floor, their breath visible in the cold air, their faces hard with fatigue and something else, something that had moved through the club overnight like a current, changing the charge of everything it touched. Jack stood in the center. He told them everything. The trafficking network, Curiel, the children, Sarah Bennett, the evidence, the compound in the hills. He told them about Bowie. He said the name clearly, without anger, and watched the room absorb it, watched the specific combination of disbelief and rage and grief that moves through a brotherhood when betrayal is named. Bowie wasn't there. He hadn't answered the call, which confirmed what they already knew. Then Jack laid out the plan. Reaper would lead the main assault on Curiel's estate with 12 men. Their job was noise, maximum aggression, maximum visibility, drawing every defender to the front. Cole and Hatchet would go to Pinecrest to extract Sarah. Gage and Webb would enter the estate from a secondary access point, a maintenance road Webb knew about, and reach the basement while the guards were engaged at the gates. Jack would enter the main house and find Carlisle. "I'm not going to lie to you," Jack said. "Some of us may not come back from this. These are trained men with automatic weapons behind fortified positions, and we're riding Harleys and carrying what we carry. The math doesn't work in our favor." He paused. "But there are children in that basement. Some of them have been there for weeks, some longer. They were taken from the system that was supposed to protect them, and they're being held by a man who sells them. And the only people in this city who know about it and are willing to do something about it are standing in this room." He looked at each man, one at a time. "If anyone walks out that door right now, I won't think less of you. This isn't what you signed up for. This goes beyond the patch and beyond the brotherhood and into something else. But I'm going. And I need to know who's going with me." Nobody walked out. Nobody moved. Then one by one, not dramatically, not with speeches, just with nods and small gestures and the shifting of weight from one foot to the other. That means, "I'm here, I'm staying, let's do this." 19 men committed. Jack nodded. "We ride in 40 minutes. Get your weapons, get your gear, and somebody get me more coffee." At 5:51 a.m., Jack called Cole. "Pinecrest," he said. "Private facility east of the city. Webb drew the layout. I'm sending a photo. Sarah's there." "How many?" "Webb says minimal security. 4, maybe 5. The place isn't built like a fortress. It's built like a clinic. They're relying on secrecy, not force." "When do I go?" 6:15. Exactly. That's when we hit the estate. When Curiel's people start getting calls about an assault on the compound, they'll pull from secondary locations, including Pinecrest. You'll have a window." "How big a window?" "Small." "Coal-sized?" Jack almost smiled. "Almost." "Yeah. I'll take Hatchet and Tiny." "Tiny's watching Ava." "Then just Hatchet." A pause. "And Jack." "Yeah. If the DNA comes back the way I think it does, if she's mine." "Cole, I need you to know that I would have been there. If I'd known, I would have been there every day. Jack closed his eyes, opened them. I know. Don't let anything happen to her. Nothing's going to happen to her. The line went dead. At 6:12 a.m., as the first gray light of dawn bled through the clouds and the rain finally slowed to a cold drizzle, 12 Harleys rolled out of the cannery loading dock and onto the highway heading south. The sound of them was enormous. Not just volume, presence. The specific thunder of 12 heavy engines running together, the vibration you feel in your chest before you hear it in your ears. They rode in formation, two abreast, with Jack and Reaper at the lead, and the highway was empty enough at that hour that the formation held, a river of chrome and leather and controlled fury moving through the dawn toward the hills. Jack's hands were steady on the grips. His heart rate was elevated but controlled. The specific physiological state of a man who has trained his body to function under stress, whose adrenal response has been calibrated by years of exposure to situations where panic means death. He thought about the layout Webb had drawn. He thought about the basement. He thought about 12 to 15 children behind locked doors. He thought about Ava sitting in a folding chair in a basement apartment asking Cole if her mother was going to be okay, and Cole not knowing the answer but staying anyway. The estate road was unmarked, a gravel turnoff from a county highway that climbed into forested hills through switchbacks and blind curves. Jack had studied the map and memorized the terrain. 2 miles from the gate, he raised his fist. The formation slowed. Engines dropped from roar to growl. He pulled off the road into a clearing and killed his engine. The others followed. 12 men dismounted in the pre-dawn quiet. The forest smelled of wet pine and cold earth. Birds were starting somewhere above them, early risers, oblivious. "Gage," Jack said, "you and Webb take the maintenance road. It branches off a half-mile back. Look for the power line cut. Follow it east. It comes up behind the generator building. You'll have to go on foot for the last quarter mile." He handed Gage the paper bag map. "The basement access is here. Inside the east wing, ground floor, third door on the left. The children will be sedated. Webb knows the drugs. He'll manage the medical." He looked at Webb. "You're going to do this." Webb nodded. His face was the color of old paper, but his hands, those surgeon's hands, were steady for the first time all night. Some part of him had found something to hold on to, something that looked like the beginning of redemption, or at least the possibility of it. Gage and Webb disappeared into the trees. Jack turned to Reaper and the remaining 10 men. "Straight up the road, through the gate. Make noise. Make them look at you." He pulled the .45 from his waistband and checked the magazine. Full. "I'm going in through the east side. Once the guards are engaged at the front, I'll move on the main house." Reaper said, "You're going in alone." "I'm going in for Kirill." "Jack, this is mine, Reaper." The words were quiet, but they carried a finality that closed the conversation. "Sarah trusted me. She sent her daughter to me. And I let her disappear 9 years ago because I told myself I was respecting her wishes when the truth is I was afraid of what I'd find if I kept looking." He paused. "I'm not afraid anymore." Reaper held his gaze for a long moment. Then he put his hand on Jack's shoulder. Once, hard, the grip of a man who is saying something he can't say with words, and turned to the others. "Mount up." 6:15 a shim. 12 Harleys hit the gravel road at full throttle, the pipes open, the sound of them hitting the trees and the hills and the sky like a declaration. The gate appeared around the last switchback, wrought iron, 12 feet high, flanked by stone pillars and surveillance cameras. And Reaper didn't slow down. He aimed the front wheel at the center seam and twisted the throttle, and the Harley hit the gate at 60 miles an hour, and the chain that held it gave with a sound like a bone breaking. And the gate burst open and Reaper was through, and the others poured in behind him like water through a breach. Gunfire. Immediate. From the left, a guard position behind a stone wall, muzzle flash in the gray dawn. And from the right, another position, elevated, on the roof of an outbuilding. The bikers scattered, engines screaming, tires throwing gravel, bodies low over handlebars. One of the younger members, a kid named Finch, who'd been prospecting for 8 months, took a round through the shoulder and stayed on his bike, his left arm hanging useless, steering with his right, his face locked in a grimace that was half pain and half something more primal. Reaper dismounted behind a concrete planter and returned fire with a precision that said everything about where he'd learned to shoot. Controlled bursts, targeting muzzle flash. His face was absolutely calm. The courtyard erupted into a war zone. Bullets punched into stone and metal, and the air was full of the sound of it. The crack of rifle fire, the deeper boom of shotguns, the scream of engines as bikers repositioned, the shatter of glass. A fuel drum near the guard building caught around and detonated, a ball of orange fire that lifted into the dawn sky and threw heat across the courtyard in a wave. In the chaos, Jack moved. He'd come around the east side on foot while the main assault hit the front. The tree line gave him cover within 50 yards of the east wing, and the guards, all of them, had been pulled toward the gate by the sound and fury of 12 Harleys doing what Harleys do. Jack sprinted across the open ground in a low crouch, his boots silent on the wet grass, and reached the east wing service entrance without being seen. The door was locked. He put his shoulder into it, and it held. He put his boot into it, and something cracked. One more kick, and the frame gave, and he was inside in a corridor that smelled of floor polish and the specific antiseptic emptiness of a building that was clean in the way of things designed to look legitimate. He moved fast. Down the corridor, past closed doors, his 45 up, sweeping corners. The sounds of the firefight outside were muffled in here, distant, like a storm happening in another country. He found the staircase that led to the second floor. Upstairs, the corridor was wider, carpeted, art on the walls, the kind of art that costs money and means nothing, abstract shapes in expensive frames. The West Wing, the master suite. The door at the end of the hall was open. Jack slowed, raised the 45, approached. The master suite was large. A wall of windows overlooked the burning courtyard below, and the firelight from the exploded fuel drum threw moving shadows across the ceiling. A desk, bookshelves, a leather chair, and Richard Carryle standing at the window watching his empire burn. He was smaller than Jack expected. Not physically, he was average height, average build, the kind of man who disappears in a crowd, but somehow smaller, as if the mythology that had built up around his name had inflated him into something larger than the reality. He wore a dark suit, no tie, and he was holding a glass of something amber that he hadn't been drinking. His reflection stared back at him from the window glass, superimposed over the chaos below. He turned when Jack entered. His expression was calm, not the calm of courage, the calm of a man who has spent so long controlling everything around him that he has forgotten how to be afraid. "Mr. Morrison," he said. Polite, the voice of a man chairing a board meeting. "You're making a mess of my property." Jack kept the 45 trained on Carriel's chest. "Where are the children?" "Which children?" "The ones in your basement." Carriel tilted his head slightly. "You know, I've always admired the outlaw ethos, the brotherhood, the loyalty. Very appealing mythology." He set the glass down on the window ledge. "But you're making a mistake. Whatever you think you found was whatever that woman told you, sit down. It's more complicated than you understand. The people involved in this, sit down." Carriel sat. In the leather chair behind the desk, his hands visible on the surface. The posture of a man who believed he still had options, who believed that money and connections and the architecture of protection he'd built over decades would hold even now, even with Harleys roaring in his courtyard and his guards engaged and smoke rising from his compound. Jack stood across the desk from him. The 45 didn't waver. Below, the gunfire was changing, shifting rhythm, moving deeper into the compound. Reaper's team advancing. And somewhere beneath them, in the basement that didn't appear on any building permit, Gage was moving through a reinforced door with a terrified surgeon and a shotgun and the knowledge of what was behind those locked cells. And somewhere east of the city, Cole Martinez was kicking in the door of a private medical facility where a woman he'd loved a decade ago lay unconscious, being held by men who intended to make sure she never woke up. And somewhere in a basement apartment beneath a tattoo parlor, a 10-year-old girl sat with Tiny's jacket over her shoulders and waited for the sound of engines that would mean someone was coming back. Jack said, "It's over, Richard." And downstairs, muffled but unmistakable through the floor, a sound rose that made both men go still. The sound of children screaming. Not in terror, in something else. Something that Jack had heard once before, in a village in Kandahar, when his unit had opened a building where people had been held for weeks. The sound of children realizing that someone had come for them. Kirill's face changed. For the first time, something moved behind the polished mask. Something old and cold and frightened. The thing that had always been underneath the fundraisers and the charity galas and the practiced smile. He opened the desk drawer. Jack saw the gun a half-second before Cariel's hand reached it. A compact automatic, black, hidden beneath papers. And he moved, lunging across the desk, his hand closing on Carol's wrist as the gun came up, and the two of them crashed backward into the bookshelf, and volumes fell around them, and the gun went off once into the ceiling, plaster raining down, and Jack slammed Cariel's wrist against the shelf until the fingers opened and the gun fell. And then he had Carol against the wall with one hand on his throat and the .45 pressed under his chin, and both of them were breathing hard, and the screaming from below was louder now, and the firelight from the courtyard danced across the walls, and Jack Morrison looked into the eyes of the man who had sold children and hunted Sarah and tried to take Ava, and every broken thing inside him, every scar from Fallujah, every year of silence. Every morning he'd woken up and chosen to keep going for reasons he couldn't always name. Every broken thing wanted him to pull the trigger. He didn't. He dragged Cariel to the chair, threw him into it, zip-tied his wrist to the armrests with ties from his jacket pocket. Cariel's lip was split. Blood ran down his chin. The polished veneer was cracked now, and underneath it was something small and desperate and ugly. Jack's phone buzzed. Gage. He answered. Jack! Gage's voice was shaking, not from fear. We're in the basement. The doors are open. A sound in the background, children's voices, crying, calling out. 15 kids, some of them can't walk. Webb's working on them. His voice cracked. Jack, some of them are so young. Jack closed his eyes, opened them. Get them out, every one of them, through the maintenance road. I've got Cariel. Copy. He hung up, looked at Cariel. The man in the chair stared back with blood on his face and something in his eyes that said he still believed, even now, tied to a chair in a burning mansion with his guards falling and his basement emptied, that he would survive this, that his phone calls and his connections and his money would rearrange the world back into the shape that protected him. And from somewhere below, the sound of a door being kicked open. And boots on stairs. And Reaper's voice, loud and clear, and carrying the specific authority of a man who has just won a firefight and is not done yet. Clear. East wing is clear. The estate was falling, room by room, door by door. The architecture of something monstrous coming apart at the seams. Jack stood over Carol and waited for the dawn to finish breaking through the windows. And outside, the last gunshots echoed off the hills and went silent. And the only sounds left were engines cooling and men breathing, and from somewhere on the service road behind the compound, the sound of children being carried into the early morning light by hands that had done violent things and were now doing the gentlest thing they had ever done. And then his phone buzzed again. Cole. One word on the screen. Sarah. Jack stared at it, waited. 3 dots appeared, indicating Cole was typing. They held for a long moment, too long, and then disappeared. Appeared again. Disappeared. Then the message came through, and Jack Morrison, who had held himself together through everything this night had thrown at him, who had carried evidence and led men, and faced down the man who had orchestrated all of it. Jack Morrison read the message and put one hand on the desk and lowered his head and stayed there for a long time, breathing, while Richard Carroll watched from the chair, and the dawn filled the room, and the children's voices carried through the broken windows from somewhere below. The message from Cole read, "She's awake." She said his name. She said Cole. Jack. The DNA isn't back yet, and it doesn't matter. She said my name. She asked for Ava. Jack stood in that room for a long time, not because he needed to, because his body demanded it. A moment, just one, to let the information pass through him before he had to move again. Sarah was awake. She had said Cole's name. She had asked for Ava. 3 facts that rearranged the architecture of the last 9 years and rebuilt it into something that had a shape he could recognize, a shape that looked like the beginning of an answer to a question he'd been carrying since the morning he woke up, and she was gone. Carlisle was zip-tied to the chair, blood on his chin. The expensive suit wrinkled and torn at the shoulder. He had stopped talking. The silence of a man whose machinery had finally broken down, whose scripts had run out, who was sitting in the wreckage of something he'd built with stolen children and corrupted institutions, and was discovering that the world looked very different from this angle. Jack didn't look at him. He pocketed his phone and walked out of the room. The hallway was filled with smoke, thin, acrid, drifting up from the courtyard through broken windows. The fuel drum fire had spread to an outbuilding and was burning itself out, orange light pulsing against the dawn gray. Jack moved down the stairs, through the East Wing corridor, and out the service entrance he'd kicked in 20 minutes earlier. The courtyard was aftermath. Broken glass. Shell casings scattered across gravel like terrible confetti. 2 of Carriol's guard vehicles were burning, their tires melted, the heat coming off them in waves that distorted the air. Reaper's team had taken the compound in stages: gate, courtyard, west wing, east wing. And they stood now in various positions of exhaustion and alert, weapons still in hand, faces streaked with sweat and smoke. Finch was sitting against a stone planter with his left arm in a makeshift sling fashioned from someone's belt, his face pale, but his eyes clear. 2 other members had taken minor injuries, a graze across the forearm, a cut from flying glass. But everyone was standing. Everyone was breathing. Reaper met Jack at the edge of the courtyard. His face was black with smoke residue. His hands were steady. 3 of their guys surrendered, Reaper said. Rest scattered into the trees. Nobody dead on our side. Finch needs a hospital. He's going to get one, but not yet. Jack looked toward the east side of the compound, where the maintenance road emerged from the tree line. Gage? On the service road, with the kids. Reaper's voice changed on the last word. Something shifted in it, a crack in the operational tone that he'd maintained through the entire assault. Jack, you need to see them. They walked around the east wing, past the service entrance, down a gravel path that led to the maintenance road, where the forest thinned and the gray dawn light came through the canopy in long, pale shafts. Gage was there. Webb was there. And between them, sitting and standing and lying on the ground in various states of consciousness, were 15 children. Some were awake. Some were still sedated, their bodies limp, being held by bikers who had never held a child before and were doing it anyway with the terrified gentleness of men handling something they understood was more fragile and more important than anything they'd ever touched. Some of the children were crying, not the loud, immediate cry of sudden fear, but the slow, exhausted weeping of children who had been afraid for a long time and were now being told it was over and couldn't quite believe it yet. The youngest was maybe 4, a boy. He was being held by a biker named Dutch, a man who had done 18 months in a federal facility for assault and had a face that frightened most adults. And the boy had both arms around Dutch's neck and his face buried in Dutch's leather jacket. And Dutch was standing very still with one hand on the child's back. And his expression was the expression of a man who is being taken apart from the inside and is letting it happen, because the thing doing the taking is something he didn't know he needed. Webb was moving between the children with the focused precision of a doctor who has remembered what the job is supposed to mean. Checking pulses, adjusting positions, monitoring the sedated ones for breathing irregularities. His hands were steady, steadier than they'd been all night. And something had changed in his face, a reorientation, a compass needle finding north after years of spinning. Gage came to Jack. His eyes were wet, and he didn't care. Some of them don't know their names, he said. The younger ones. They've been here, Jack. Some of these kids have been here for months. They don't know what month it is. They don't know where they are. His voice caught. One of them asked me if I was taking her to a new family. She said it like it was normal, like this was just what happened to her. Jack absorbed it, let it hit him, didn't deflect it or manage it or tuck it away for later. He let it land in his chest and stay there because these children deserved to be felt, not processed. He crouched down next to a girl who was sitting on the ground, maybe 7 years old, wrapped in a blanket someone had found inside the compound. She was awake. Her eyes were enormous in her thin face, and she was watching the bikers around her with the hypervigilant attention of a child who has learned that adults are unpredictable and that the safest strategy is to watch everything and trust nothing. "Hey," Jack said, quietly, the way he'd spoken to Ava in the clubhouse, A lifetime ago. "My name's Jack. We're going to get you somewhere safe." She looked at him, at the scar on his face, at the grease under his fingernails, at the leather jacket with the Devil's Run patch. She was reading him the way children read adults. Not words, not credentials, but something deeper, something in the eyes and the hands and the quality of attention. "Are you a police officer?" she asked. "No." "Good," she said, and the single word carried a weight that no 7-year-old should be able to put on a word, the accumulated knowledge of a child who had learned that badges didn't mean safety. Jack stayed with her for a moment, then he stood up and made the calls. The federal prosecutor Sarah had been trying to reach, a woman named Catherine Park, whose name was in Sarah's notes along with a detailed explanation of why she could be trusted because she had spent 3 years investigating Corral's network from the outside and had been blocked at every turn by local law enforcement, received a copy of everything on the USB drive at 6:42 a.m. It was sent from 4 different email addresses simultaneously, with copies uploaded to 3 separate cloud accounts, and a physical copy handed to a journalist Reaper knew at the state's largest newspaper. Redundancy. Insurance. The kind of paranoid thoroughness that Sarah Bennett would have appreciated. By 7:15, Catherine Park had called Jack directly. She'd been awake already. Prosecutors working trafficking cases kept irregular hours, and she'd opened the files and gone silent on the line for 90 seconds before saying, in a voice that was shaking with something that was either rage or vindication or both, "I've been looking for this for 3 years. How did you get it?" "A woman named Sarah Bennett spent 2 years building it, almost died for it. Her daughter walked into my clubhouse last night holding a stolen gun and asked us for help." Silence on the line. "I'm mobilizing a team," Park said. "Federal. Outside the local jurisdiction entirely. I need the children kept safe and I need the compound secured as a crime scene." "The children are with us. The compound is secured. Richard Carroll is zip-tied to a chair in his own office." Another silence, longer. "Mr. Morrison, do you understand that what you did tonight?" "I understand. Send your people. We'll be here." He hung up. The next 3 hours were a controlled unraveling of everything Carroll had built. Federal vehicles arrived at the estate by 8:30. SUVs with government plates, driven by people in windbreakers who moved with the quiet efficiency of an operation that had been waiting for this moment and was prepared for it. They took control of the compound, secured the evidence, processed the children with a care that was genuine. Paramedics and social workers and trauma specialists who arrived in a second wave and began the slow, patient work of assessing what had been done to 15 young human beings and beginning the process of undoing it. Jack watched them work. He stood at the edge of the compound with a cigarette he'd bummed from Reaper and let the professionals do what professionals do, and he felt for the first time in 12 hours the exhaustion arrive. Not gradually, all at once, like a wave breaking. His hands started shaking. His knees went soft. The adrenaline that had been holding him upright since Ava walked into the clubhouse drained out of him and left behind a body that was 44 years old and had been awake for 26 hours and had fought a small war and was now standing in the cold dawn smoke of its aftermath. Reaper appeared beside him, handed him a bottle of water. Cole called. Jack took the water, drank half of it. "And?" "He's got Sarah. She's conscious, weak but conscious. Hatchet drove them straight to Good Samaritan. Not St. Vincent's, not Pinecrest, not anywhere tied to Carroll's network. She's in a clean facility with clean doctors." Reaper paused. "He says she's asking for Ava." "Then let's get Ava to her mother." They rode back into the city as the morning opened around them. Not 12 bikes anymore, just 4. Jack, Reaper, Gage, and Dutch, who had given the child he'd been holding to a paramedic with the reluctance of a man releasing something he didn't know he'd been missing until he found it. Finch had gone to the hospital in a federal vehicle, his arm stabilized, his face still carrying the locked jaw expression of a young man who had been shot and stayed on his bike and would carry that knowledge for the rest of his life like a medal he'd never need to show anyone. The city was waking up. Traffic beginning. Commuters in their cars with their coffee and their routine, moving through a world that had no idea what had happened in the hills above them while they slept. Jack rode through it all and felt the strangeness of it. The gap between the night he'd just survived and the ordinary Tuesday morning happening all around him, the two realities sliding past each other without touching. They reached the tattoo parlor at 8:50. Jack went down the stairs to the basement apartment and knocked. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, the pattern they'd agreed on, and Tiny opened the door with the shotgun still in his hand and the expression of a man who had been prepared to use it and was relieved he didn't have to. Ava was asleep. She was curled on a couch in the corner under a blanket Ray had provided, with Cole's leather jacket still wrapped around her. Her shoes were off. Her hair was dry now, spread across the cushion. In sleep, her face had released the tension that had held it rigid since she'd walked into the clubhouse, and she looked for the first time like what she was, a 10-year-old child, exhausted, small, still alive. Jack crouched next to the couch. He didn't wake her immediately. He just looked at her for a moment, at this girl who had walked alone through the rain carrying a gun and a secret and the desperate hope that somewhere in the world there were people worth trusting. And he thought about the fact that she had been right. She had walked into the most dangerous room she could find, and she had been right. He put his hand on her shoulder, gently. She woke instantly. The way children who've been in danger wake, not groggy but immediate, eyes open and scanning, body tensing. She saw Jack, read his face, and something in what she saw there made her sit up. "Your mom's awake," Jack said. "She's at a hospital, a safe one. She's asking for you." Ava's face went through something that didn't have a name, a progression of emotions so fast and so layered that trying to identify them individually was like trying to count raindrops. Relief and fear and hope, and the specific caution of a child who has been disappointed too many times to trust good news without verification. She looked at Jack's eyes, doing her math, running her calculations. "She's really okay?" "She's really okay." "And Cole?" "Cole's with her. He's been with her since this morning." Ava pressed her lips together. Her chin trembled. One tear broke free and ran down her cheek, and she wiped it away with the back of her hand in a gesture so fierce and so reflexive that it broke Jack's heart. The gesture of a child who had taught herself not to cry because crying slowed you down, and she hadn't been able to afford slow. "Can we go now?" she whispered. "We can go now." He drove her to the hospital himself, not on the Harley, in Ray's car, a battered Subaru that smelled of paint thinner and lavender air freshener. Ava sat in the passenger seat with Cole's jacket on her lap, holding it, her fingers working the leather the way a child works a comfort object, tracing the seams and the zippers and the worn patches. She didn't speak. Jack didn't make her. Good Samaritan Hospital was clean and bright and entirely free of anyone connected to Carlisle's network. Jack had verified this through Catherine Park, who had already begun the process of identifying and isolating every law enforcement officer, judge, social worker, and medical professional tied to the trafficking operation. The arrests would take days, weeks. The full scope of what Sarah had documented would take months to prosecute, but the machinery was moving now, and it was federal machinery, the kind that didn't answer to local power structures and didn't stop once it started. They found Sarah's room on the 3rd floor. The door was open. Cole was sitting in a chair beside the bed, and he was holding Sarah's hand, and neither of them was speaking. They were just there, in the same space, after 9 years of not being. Sarah looked up when Jack appeared in the doorway. She was thin, pale. The bruises from the car accident were still vivid on her face and arms, and an IV line ran into the back of her hand, and monitors beeped quietly beside the bed. But her eyes were clear, those dark, serious, steady eyes that Jack had recognized in her daughter. And when she saw him, something moved through her expression that was too complex for any single word. Gratitude and guilt and grief, and something that might have been the specific relief of a woman who had spent 9 years running and had finally been allowed to stop. "Jack," she said. Her voice was thin, damaged from the intubation, but present. "Hey, Sarah. You came. Your daughter made it pretty hard not to." He stepped aside. Ava was behind him, standing in the doorway, looking at her mother. For a moment, neither of them moved. The hospital hummed around them. Machines, ventilation, the distant sound of voices and footsteps, the ordinary sounds of a place where people were being put back together. Sunlight came through the window and fell across the bed in a warm rectangle that touched Sarah's hand where Cole was holding it. Then Ava crossed the room. Not running, walking, deliberate, controlled, the way she'd walked into the clubhouse. And she reached the bed and she stopped and she looked at her mother's face and her mother looked back at her. And Sarah lifted her free hand, the one with the IV, trailing the tube, and touched her daughter's cheek, and Ava's composure broke. She climbed onto the bed, carefully, around the wires and the monitors, with the instinctive caution of a child who understands that her mother is fragile. She pressed her face into Sarah's shoulder and she cried. Not the fierce, wiped-away tears from the car, but the real thing, the full thing, the accumulated grief and terror and loneliness of a 10-year-old who had spent 4 days holding the world together and was now, finally, allowed to let it fall apart. Sarah wrapped her arm around her daughter and held her and closed her eyes and said nothing because there was nothing to say that the holding didn't say better. Cole sat in the chair. He hadn't let go of Sarah's other hand. He was watching them, mother and daughter, and his face was doing something it hadn't done in 12 years of Jack knowing him. It was open, unguarded. The walls he'd spent a lifetime building were down, not demolished, but simply set aside. The way a man sets aside a weapon when he realizes he's finally somewhere he doesn't need one. Jack leaned against the doorframe and watched. He gave them this, the moment, the quiet after the storm. He'd earned the right to witness it, but he hadn't earned the right to be in the center of it, and he knew the difference. After a while, Sarah looked at him over Ava's head. "The storage unit," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The USB drive. Federal prosecutor has it. Everything, Catherine Park." Sarah closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet. "I tried to reach her for months. Dalton intercepted everything. She has it now. She's moving on Carlisle. It's done, Sarah. The children, 15, all alive, all out. They're being taken care of." Sarah's arm tightened around Ava. She pressed her face into her daughter's hair and stayed there, breathing, the monitors recording the acceleration of her heart rate in small green peaks that meant she was feeling something too large for her damaged body to contain quietly. Cole said, "Sarah," just her name, the first word he'd said to her in a decade, spoken in that room, in that light, with her daughter between them. She looked at him, at his face, at the scarred hands holding hers, at the years written on both of them, the years apart, the years of carrying separate versions of the same grief. "I should have told you," she said. "Yeah. I was afraid. Dalton was already watching me. I'd seen what Carol's people did to anyone who got close, and I thought, if I told you, you'd come for me, and they'd kill you, and then Ava would have no one. You should have told me." "I know." The words sat between them. Not forgiveness. That would take time, would take the slow, unglamorous work of rebuilding something that had been broken by fear and silence and the terrible logic of a woman who had chosen isolation to protect the people she loved. But the words were there, honest and raw and undecorated, and they were the beginning of something. Cole said, "The DNA test." Sarah looked at him. Then she looked at Ava, who had gone quiet against her shoulder listening. "You don't need a test," Sarah said. "She's yours. She's always been yours." Cole exhaled, a sound that came from somewhere deep, from the bottom of whatever well he'd been drawing from all night, from the place where the thing he'd been afraid to want lived alongside the thing he'd been afraid to be. He lowered his head. His shoulders moved once. Then he was still. Ava lifted her face from her mother's shoulder. She looked at Cole. Those dark eyes, his eyes now confirmed, claimed, searching his face for something she could hold on to. "Hey," she said. Cole lifted his head. His eyes were red. His face was wrecked and unashamed. "Hey," he said back. And that was enough. For now. For the beginning of something that would take years to build and a lifetime to understand. That single word, exchanged across a hospital bed in the morning light, between a man who had never expected to be a father and a girl who had walked through the rain to find one, was enough. The days after were hard in different ways. Federal agents arrested Mark Dalton at his home on Tuesday afternoon. He went quietly. The quiet of a man who had seen the scope of what was coming and understood that resistance was theater. 17 other arrests followed in the next 2 weeks. Police officers, social workers, a family court judge, 2 attorneys, and the operators of 3 private adoption agencies that had served as front organizations for Carol's network. The story broke in the newspaper first. Reaper's journalist Contact published it on Thursday. And by Friday, it was national. The kind of story that made people look at their own cities and wonder what was happening in the buildings they drove past every day without noticing. Stephen Bowman, Bowie, was found in a motel in Salem, Oregon, 4 days after the raid. He had $40,000 in cash in a duffel bag and a bus ticket to Phoenix. The federal agents who arrested him said he didn't speak. He just sat on the motel bed and stared at the wall. And when they put the cuffs on, he said one thing: "Tell Morrison I'm sorry." The agents relayed the message. Jack received it and said nothing. He'd think about it later. Not now. Carol's trial would take a year, maybe more. The evidence Sarah had built, the documents, the photographs, the financial records on the USB drive, was being described by federal prosecutors as one of the most comprehensive private investigations into child trafficking ever assembled. A woman with no law enforcement training, no resources, no protection, working alone for 2 years with a daughter to raise and a target on her back. The prosecutors called it extraordinary. Jack called it Sarah. Dr. Marcus Webb cooperated fully. He testified before a grand jury within the first week and provided information that led to the identification of 23 additional children who had been moved through Carol's network over the preceding 4 years. Most of them were found. Some were still being looked for. Webb would face charges of his own. His cooperation would mitigate but not erase what he'd done. And he accepted this with the bleak, quiet compliance of a man who had decided that punishment was preferable to the weight of what he'd been carrying. The custody hearing happened on a Thursday, 3 weeks after the raid. The courtroom smelled of old wood and floor wax and the specific institutional staleness of a room where decisions about people's lives are made under fluorescent lights. Jack was there. Reaper was there. Gage and Hatchet and Tiny and Dutch, all of them, cleaned up in ways that ranged from earnest to approximately presentable, wearing collared shirts that didn't quite hide the tattoos and boots that had been wiped but not polished, and faces that bore the permanent marks of lives lived outside the lines. The judge, a woman named Reeves, assigned from outside the county specifically because every local family court judge was either compromised or under investigation, looked at Cole Martinez across the courtroom and saw what the file in front of her told her to see. A man with a criminal record, a member of an outlaw motorcycle club, a person the system would ordinarily categorize as unsuitable. Cole sat at the defendant's table in a shirt Ray had ironed for him, and his hands were flat on the table in front of him the way Jack's had been at the clubhouse on the night this started, and he waited. The state's attorney argued that Cole lacked stable housing, lacked conventional employment, and was associated with a criminal organization. The words were clinical, correct, in their narrow definitions. Completely inadequate to describe the man who had carried a child through the rain and the dark and the mountains, who had kicked in the door of a private facility to rescue her mother, who had sat on a cabin floor and listened to a 10-year-old describe a basement full of captive children without flinching. Cole's attorney, a public defender named Watts, who had taken the case pro bono after reading about it in the newspaper, presented the counter. Cole's military service, his consistent presence in the community, the testimonies of 12 men who would swear to his character, and then Ava asked to speak. The judge hesitated. A 10-year-old taking the stand in a custody hearing was unusual, but Catherine Park, who was present as a federal observer, leaned over and said something to the judge that Jack couldn't hear, and the judge nodded. Ava walked to the front of the courtroom. She was wearing new clothes, a sweater and jeans that Sarah had picked out from the hospital, where she was recovering steadily, watching the hearing via a video link the hospital staff had arranged. Ava looked small in the witness area. She looked exactly as small as a 10-year-old is supposed to look in a room full of adults making decisions about her life. She looked at the judge. She didn't look at Cole. Not yet. "My mom spent 9 years keeping me safe," Ava said. Her voice was clear and even and carried the specific authority of a child who has been through enough to earn the right to speak in rooms where children are usually spoken about rather than spoken to. She did everything alone. She was scared every day. She didn't tell anyone because she was protecting us, protecting me, and protecting him. She paused. When she couldn't protect me anymore, she sent me to the only place she believed was safe. And she was right. She looked at Cole. He didn't know about me. That's not his fault. Nobody told him. But when he found out he might be my father, he didn't run. He didn't hesitate. He put his jacket on me, and he stayed. Her voice caught, just barely. He stayed when people were coming for us. He stayed when it was dangerous. He stayed when he could have left and nobody would have blamed him. She paused. I don't need someone perfect. I need someone who stays. The courtroom was very quiet. The judge looked at Ava for a long time. Then she looked at Cole. Then she looked at the file in front of her, and then she closed it, and she took off her glasses and set them on the bench and rubbed the bridge of her nose in the gesture of a woman who has spent decades making decisions inside a system that doesn't always work and has just been confronted with a case that falls entirely outside its categories. Custody is granted, Judge Reeves said. Provisional, 6 months. With mandatory check-ins and a caseworker assigned by the federal team. She looked at Cole directly. Mr. Martinez, that child just spoke for you in a way that most adults can't speak for themselves. Don't make her wrong. Cole nodded. Once. His jaw was locked and his eyes were bright with something he wasn't going to shed in a courtroom, and he nodded, and that was all. Outside on the courthouse steps, Ava walked down to where Cole was standing and stopped in front of him. The October sun was thin and pale, and the city moved around them, cars and pedestrians and the ordinary machinery of a Tuesday afternoon, and she looked up at him. So, she said. So, he said. This is weird. Yeah. You're going to be bad at this. Something happened to Cole's face, a crack, a fracture in the carefully maintained architecture of stoicism. And he laughed, a real laugh, the kind of sound that a man makes when something catches him completely off guard and his defenses don't engage fast enough to stop the joy from getting through. Probably, he said. That's okay, Ava said. I'm patient. She reached out and took his hand. Her small fingers wrapped around 2 of his scarred, heavy-knuckled fingers. Not his whole hand. She couldn't reach around it. Just 2 fingers. And she held on. Cole looked down at her hand in his, at the size difference, at the way her fingers curled around his with a grip that was stronger than it looked. The grip of a child who had learned to hold on to things because letting go had never been an option. He closed his hand around hers, carefully. The way Tiny had handled that hot chocolate mug on the first night, with the deliberate gentleness of someone who knows their own strength and is choosing, precisely and intentionally, to be soft. Jack watched from the top of the steps, Reaper beside him, Gage and Tiny and Dutch and Hatchet behind them, a line of men in leather and denim standing on courthouse steps in the afternoon light, watching a 10-year-old girl hold a biker's hand and walk toward a car where a life neither of them had expected was about to begin. Reaper said, "She's going to be okay." Jack didn't answer right away. He watched Cole open the car door for Ava with a formality that was clearly new to him and slightly awkward and entirely sincere, and he watched Ava get in and reach for the seatbelt and pause and look up at Cole with an expression that said, "You're supposed to check that I'm buckled in. That's what parents do." And he watched Cole figure that out in real time and lean in and check the belt with hands that fumbled slightly because they had never done this before. "Yeah," Jack said. "She is." That Sunday, the first Sunday after the hearing, they gathered at the diner next to the clubhouse. The same diner where Sarah had worked the morning shift a decade ago, where the neon sign still blinked its broken message, where the coffee was bad and the seats were cracked vinyl and the windows looked out on a gravel lot full of Harleys. Sarah was there, in a wheelchair, still weak, but there, present, upright, her eyes moving around the room with the quiet wonder of a woman seeing a place she'd left a lifetime ago and finding it unchanged in the ways that mattered. Cole pushed her chair. Ava walked beside them, one hand on the armrest, maintaining contact. Jack had a table set, not with anything fancy. The diner didn't do fancy, but with plates and cups and a pot of coffee and a second pot of hot chocolate and enough food for 20 people, because that's how many showed up. The whole club, every member, every prospect, filling the booths and pulling up chairs and making the kind of noise that happens when a room full of people who've been through something together are finally allowed to stop being at war and start being a family. Ava sat between Sarah and Cole. She had a plate of pancakes in front of her and a mug of hot chocolate, and Cole's leather jacket draped over the back of her chair. He'd tried to take it back twice, and she'd refused twice, and he'd stopped trying. And she was watching the room with an expression Jack recognized from the first night. The same assessment, the same careful calculation, but different now. Not measuring threat, measuring belonging, checking the dimensions of a thing she'd never had before to make sure it was real. Jack sat at the head of the long table with a cup of coffee he actually drank this time. He looked at them. At Cole, learning to cut Ava's pancakes into the right-sized pieces because Sarah whispered the instruction to him, and he followed it with the focused attention of a combat operation. At Tiny showing Ava something on his phone that made her laugh out loud for the first time since any of them had known her. At Gage sitting at the end of the table with a look on his face that said he was thinking about the children from the basement and whether they were laughing somewhere too. He looked at Sarah, who was looking back at him with those dark eyes, Ava's eyes, the eyes that had watched him from across a diner counter 10 years ago. And she mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Jack nodded, raised his coffee cup. An inch, a gesture no one else in the room noticed. Outside, the November rain had stopped for the first time in a week. Pale sunlight fell across the gravel lot where the Harleys were parked in a long row, chrome catching the light, and the neon sign, Aries, 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 blinked its patient broken message to a world that was, for one Sunday afternoon at least, a little more human than it had been the week before. And inside the diner, in the warmth and the noise and the smell of coffee and pancakes and leather, Ava Bennett sat between her mother and her father and listened to the sound of voices she trusted filling a room she was learning to call home. And she held Cole's 2 fingers under the table where nobody could see, and she did not let go.